All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bearded Gear podcast. We are on episode number 11, and I'm joined today by one of my buddies. I have the pleasure of actually saying this is a knife friend that I have met in person on multiple occasions and have hung out with. So he's a real friend and not just an internet friend that my wife doesn't understand how I keep making. This is Nick Rogers from Nitch Designs. And Nick has dabbled in knife design and knife collecting, in knife apparel design now, and all kinds of fun things. And he's always up to something new every time I talk to him. So, Nick, how are you doing today, buddy?
Doing good. Happy to be here. I'm excited to chat more about knives.
Awesome, man. Yeah, we do it plenty, whether it's in person or just in Instagram DMs. So there are a lot of topics that we've already gone over pretty extensively in our private conversations. But I find that talking knives can be a bit of a bottomless pit, at least for me. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about. But Nick, can you kind of give the listeners or viewers, if they're on YouTube, a little bit of your backstory and how you got into knives and kind of the way we got to here?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm from Southern California, grew up here all my life, and I was never really exposed to knives growing up at all, besides, general movies and stuff that you might watch. But Dad was never into knives or like hunting or camping too much. So it was kind of a weird thing. I actually got my first knife when I was 14 through a white elephant gift exchange. And it was a little Gerber LST, which is actually a really old design. I didn't know it at the time, but it was kind of this innovative, like mold injected integral folding knife, which kind of sparked the lightweight trend in knives in like the 1980s, way back then, when Gerber was apparently doing more innovative things.
They were a force to be reckoned with at one time.
Yeah. Apparently it was designer Blackie Collins, if anybody who knows who that is. But yeah, so that was my first knife. I got it just randomly from this white elephant, and I had carried that for a while. And before that, I'd never even thought about having a pocket knife. But once I started carrying that thing around, you generally start to realize pretty quick, like, oh, this is a useful thing to have. So carried that for a good bit. Ended up losing it, I think, after a little while, and really didn't think about knives even after that until college, I want to say. So this was probably, I don't know, 2014, when I was maybe in the middle of college. And I feel like there was a point where I was on YouTube for some random reason. And like a lot of people, I stumbled across Jim Skelton's YouTube channel. And he had a certain way of making people very excited about knives, I think, just showing his collection and talking about all the cool features of knives, everything like that. So just dove into that rabbit hole of his YouTube channel and not really understanding, I guess, why this thing is like super interesting, but for some reason there was like something in me that wanted to keep learning about it. So learning more about knives, I wanted to try and start buying some knives, and I did what a lot of people do, which is go on Amazon and make some questionable choices.
Sure.
And I bought some really cheap knives. Pretty much the only thing I could afford at the time, being a college student on student loans and doing that whole thing. So just cheap like Smith & Wessons and gun company knives. Learned really quickly that most gun companies do not make great knives. Moved on to some cheaper stuff. Eventually discovered Blade HQ. Just started scrolling through page after page of their website. I think the most expensive thing I worked up to when I was in college was a Kershaw Cryo, which was like $40, I think, at that time.
I had one of those, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. But pretty much every knife I had bought while I was in college had some kind of issue. Like I took it apart and it wouldn't go back together, or the inlays just popped out because they were just cheaply glued in place, or the Kershaw Cryo, that the torsion bar eventually broke, and then you realize, oh, that's what a D10 does. It keeps the knife in the blade, in the handle, right? So
yeah,
I basically,
it's a hinderer design, but it's far from being a real hinderer, the Kershaw Cryo.
For sure. I kind of just realized for the budget that I had, it didn't seem like I could afford something of actual quality. So I kind of put the hobby away for a while. At that point, I was just going to focus on school, pass all the exams, graduate. It wasn't until I actually got my first job, and when that first tax return hits, that's something special. So I took basically that money, and I knew that I wanted to get, finally a really quality knife. And this was the beginning of 2017, January of 2017. So I was looking online, and somehow I discovered Drop's website. It was Mass Drop at the time, and they had a bunch of collaborations that they used to sell on their site, and some from like Gavco. But they had one from Ferrum Forge, and it was a run of knives that they were doing at that time, and it was called Master Blaster. And that honestly may have been the first time I ever saw a Warncliffe, and it kind of blew my mind that you could design a knife that just looked the way a Warncliffe does, with that tip that comes all the way down.
Yeah.
So I kind of immediately fell in love with that design. Started obsessing about like, okay, how do I get one of these? Because they're out of stock on the Mass Drop site. So I ended up going to Ferrum Forge's site and realizing, okay, these are what knife runs are. I'm basically learning all of this for the first time. Like, so they have made 200 of these. They're basically done making them now. They're probably not going to make any more. And got really sad about it, but decided to email them anyway. And they were actually super cool. They said that they would make me a one-off of that Master Blaster. So it was really cool having that first kind of quality knife be this special like custom piece that I got to actually communicate with the maker on making it a little personal for me. And then I just remember getting that knife and it just like blowing my mind basically of like everything that a knife could be at that point.
That's a big jump.
Yeah, for sure. Going from like a cryo to, $700 custom knife kind of thing it's definitely a few leagues away. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I feel like we have talked about this before, but for most people, myself included, there's kind of this progression of like, a lot of people call it the slippery slope of like getting into collecting knives or whatever you want to label it as, where people usually start at that budget end, right? And that's just when you're not sure about any hobby, it's kind of natural for most people to start with less of an investment because there's less to lose if you don't love it, right? But then people start trying more and more nicer and nicer things, and then eventually your tastes evolve and change, and then you get to where you value enough of what can come out of spending a lot to get a good knife out of it. And it's like working up the courage, or at least it was for me. But I think it's really interesting how you completely like circumnavigated that entire process for the most part, and just like had the self-control to hold off while you didn't have much money, and then waited until the moment was right, and then you went ham and like straight into the deep end.
yeah.
Would you say when you got that Ferrum Forge Master Blaster, were you every bit like as fulfilled with it as you thought you would be, or was there any like, wow, this might have been too much money? Like, how did it actually feel when you had the knife? It was in your hand and it's real now, and you've got this, your first really nice knife.
No, honestly, at that time, it was the coolest thing I had ever handled. It was like the first knife I had ever handled with titanium, this crazy titanium material,
Yeah.
like 20 CV that they treated in-house to have this higher hardness than you could get in most other productions. Like doing a lot of research from their YouTube videos, which I used to do a lot of actually back then. They would talk a lot about the actual process of making the knives, what goes into them, the design, actual heat treating and kind of manufacturing that they do. And I think it felt worth it to me at the time. Just having that unique object that was, again, like a custom thing that was unique to me, for sure. I didn't feel like I had any regret after spending that much. It was more of just like, this is really awesome, and I loved that thing for a long time.
That's awesome. So you were actually satisfied with it, and there was no like buyer's remorse or anything like that. Because I think a lot of guys, when they do finally like make a leap and get something really nice, I've seen it more times than one, where somebody like gets a certain level of buyer's remorse, and maybe that comes from going the route I described, where it's like going from a $300 or $400 knife to all of a sudden like an $800 knife. You might not see what you perceive as $400 worth of difference, but for you, that leap was so gigantic that how could you not be really impressed with what came out of a $700 knife purchase?
Yeah, I had done some cursory research, I would say, at that time to see like what else you could get for different price points. And back then, you were pretty hard pressed to find like actual 20 CV or M390, if you can believe it. There was a time where that steel was not so widely available.
Right.
And having something custom made like that, to where the heat treat is going to be on point, the performance is on point, like it's the way that they build them are basically built to be kind of abused and used. It felt like it was definitely worth the money. And yeah, I think that's just my personality type, was to just do a lot of research basically and go after whatever the best is that I can surmise is the best at that time, instead of kind of wasting time and money slowly, climbing the tiers.
Yeah,
Just seemed like a more efficient use of time, I guess.
for sure. So what has your buying cycle been since that knife? Has it been, I know I've seen a lot of your knives, but if you were to describe your collecting habits, is there a certain range you play in? Is there a variety of things that interest you? What kind of knives do you find yourself buying?
Yeah, so from that first knife, I kind of stayed in that area for a while. It was more when mid techs were really big, and that was like a big price range for maybe like $400 to $600, something like that.
Hmm.
So I played around in that range for a while, trying out some other mid techs. That was actually when I got my first Koenig Arius, which is also back when they were doing Gen 1s. There was a Gen 1 Koenig Arius, which was also super awesome.
They're on
Yeah,
Gen
there you
4
go.
now.
I know, I still need to borrow that
Yes, you
guy.
do.
But yeah, I wanted to experience basically that top tier of what people had to offer, just from some different manufacturers, different designs. I had gotten on Sharp Eye Designs books for the mini Typhoons back when he was doing that run in-house, and I got another one of those kind of custom built to my spec, which was really fun. But since then, I've definitely grown more to appreciate what I would consider value,
Mm,
versus just the best of the best materials and everything. I'm
yeah.
definitely more interested in good for its given price, or good for its design and what it's trying to be. I think there's a lot more than just it has the fanciest steel for someone's opinion, or all these materials that you might be chasing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those interesting things where like um uh, we're going to get into knife design pretty heavily, I'm sure, but and you're aware I've even shown you the prototype. Please no one bug him for information about mine. I'll be showing it very soon. But one of those things that like was a decision to make in setting out even just designing a knife, it was like, do I design my ultimate grail, or do I design a budget piece that I think is a good design for under $100, or do I design a knife for the range that like I really enjoy, where it's like kind of in the middle of that? And it's like
Yeah,
part of me wanted to design a knife that was like ultimate grail. Like if money's no object, what's the coolest knife I can make? But at a certain point, like that's a different kind of dangerous, to financially expect that people will want to pay a lot of money for what you love. Um, and so ultimately, I kind of landed in that spot where it's like not a budget piece, but certainly not trying to like blow the doors off by adding every single crazy option conceivable. And it's like in that spot where it's like as nice of a knife as I would want to use every day, like that kind of thing.
yeah.
Do you find like when you're designing stuff, does that come into play where it's like what range you want the knife to sit in? Is that something you think about, or is it like make the design and then wherever that design lands, so be it? Or like how does that work in your
Yeah, I
brain?
mean, generally, it hasn't been so much of a factor. And I feel like that's kind of a rule that I think applies more generally to just life and things that are getting created. But I think it is, especially for custom makers, even. So I think it's just in everyone's best interest if people are able to make the things that they want to make and not have to think about, like, are other people going to like this,
Mm,
or is it going to reach a certain price point to where it's actually going to sell? I think if you want the best things, the most like original, coolest quality designs, and just things that you didn't even know that you wanted, you kind of have to let people just make the things that they want to make,
mm,
regardless of as many of those considerations.
yeah.
Obviously, if you're running a business, you have to think about that stuff. And it's fortunate that I have a day job and I don't do this full time. It's, this knife stuff is still just a hobby for me. So
Hmm.
when I'm designing a knife, I'm really just like thinking about what I would want as an enthusiast, what I'm like super interested in, what I think is a really cool design, what materials I think would work well for kind of the philosophy of use of that design,
Mhm.
not thinking as much about like price point and things. But that does come into play when you're dealing with manufacturers and you're doing licensing, and together you're kind of collaborating and you're trying to figure out what price point is going to work for this design, for their manufacturing, where do they feel comfortable with it sitting within their own kind of model tiers.
Right.
So it comes in a little later. I kind of design it and then we work it out basically.
And you hash out those details when
Yeah.
it comes time. That makes sense. Yeah, I think part of me, like, I haven't even spoken to Wii knives yet, but I think they're a good kind of example where I look at it in my mind of like, if I were to have Wii knives build my knife, would, if I like just, I'm not licensing it, and we can talk licensing versus OEM. I think that'd be an interesting rabbit hole to go down. But if I was to license it to them and just say, here's a design, do you guys want to make this? And they said yes, if all that happened, then would they want to put it in their Civivi line or in their Wii line? Or would they want to put it, now they've even got the line below that of, I think they're calling it Sencut. So like they've got tiers within their lineup. And my mind goes to like, if they had my design and they got to pick where they put it, would this be another $60 Civivi knife? Would it be a $30 like 8CR? Like where would they want to put it? And that it's like, it's this weird mind game that I play with myself that probably is meaningless to everybody and should be to me, but it's like this interesting hole to go down, because it's like,
Yeah.
Civivi crushes it. There's nothing wrong with it being a design that is in that price point. But then you have knives like the CRKT Pilar, which so many people for so long have said, like, please give us a nicer Pilar, like, and instead of just like throwing D2 on it, put like a really good steel and not Teflon washers that have play, and like titanium instead of steel on the frame lock. And like if
Yeah.
CRKT made that, people would probably eat it up and love it. They've been asking for it. But CRKT is like, no, this is a budget knife. We're going to make this a budget knife. And it's just this weird
It's
arena.
definitely hard. Yeah. It's hard to make something and then you start working with a company and then you kind of have to distance yourself from this thing, because it's kind of at that point that you start killing your design babies and like, we're going to make this fit and make some concessions on both sides so that this collaboration is going to work. So it
Yeah.
may not be what you had dreamt it would be, basically. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of topics that kind of stem from that, including like what I've been thinking about lately a lot, where custom makers who have to choose. I think you talked about this with Brian Brown too, about like, do I want this design to be solely a custom piece, or is it also going to have a production side to it?
Mm-hmm.
And what does that do to the image of the design, or the perceived quality of the design?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a lot to it.
So I think a good kind of jumping off point from here would be the difference between going OEM and licensing, because you're somebody who I've picked your brain a little bit about it, because you've really kind of gone into both segments personally, right? Because with the Ingress, which we can talk about, that was going to be an OEM project. And I keep saying to everybody that I hope that there will be a next Ingress. I understand it seems like there will be to some extent. We'll see. But then you're also in the process of, I hope this is okay to talk about, at least blanketly, you're in the process of working on a licensed knife design. And so you've gone down into the weeds of both. How would you describe the difference in that process? Like, as somebody who hasn't tried either, if they're listening to this wondering what it's like to either license a knife to a company or just have them do your production, what are the basic kind of differences there?
So I think it comes down to how much control you want to have over the specific design. Mm. And when I was doing the Ingress with Wii knives, it was my first design, and I kind of wanted as much involvement as possible. I was still learning a lot about design, prototyping, working with an OEM and how that process goes. So I saw it as a big educational opportunity, and I wanted to find out where the limits were in their manufacturing, where the limits were in the design, so I can kind of take that and move forward with it with other designs, with other companies, and just kind of edify myself with that information. So with an OEM, you're really choosing as much detail as you can up to whatever you can pay for, obviously, and then what their manufacturer constraints are. So it's a little different with different companies, but for the most part, you can ask them for what you want. If you want things machined a certain way or parts created a certain way, even if it's not how they would do it, they're still going to do it for you because you're the one paying for it. And when it comes to marketing and releases, and just you have full control over everything, basically, which is really appealing. But it is very time consuming and obviously very expensive. There's a lot of cost you have to outlay for prototyping. And if you're doing production, obviously there's a lot of cost for that. So licensing is a little easier in the sense that you're just collaborating on a design, you're going back and forth, you're kind of making modifications. Once the design is settled on, you get through prototyping. You don't have to really deal with too much. They're obviously the ones selling it. They're doing the warranty work. They're doing the marketing. All that is going through them. So you're way more hands off, but at the same time, you have less of a say in what the end product is, how it's marketed, how it's sold. You're not the one dealing with customers. You don't get that one-to-one relationship as much per se. I mean, you can still interact, but it's a little different. So I think it comes down to how much control you want to have and how much time and kind of resources you have to expend on that project. I like doing both when I can, when it makes sense to. I'm not quitting my day job anytime soon, so licensing makes a lot of sense in terms of time, but I would still like to be able to do my own OEM stuff and just have that level of control and really make something different and special.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I think it's like kind of looking at it bird's eye view. The reason why I wanted to go on this first project as well, which I'm partnered with a buddy who I'll have on the podcast soon, and we'll kind of lay this all out. But part of why we wanted to go OEM was because, much like you, your first time, neither of us knew anything about it. It was like, we want to learn the whole process. We want to see what happens when we design a knife that we really like, and then what is the design to make that knife a reality that, like, neither of us can machine it. Neither of us have the the actual machines or the know-how to use them, or like we even needed help on the 3D prototyping, like all that kind of stuff was above our understanding. But we were able to design a knife that we liked, and then it was like, let's ride this process through to the finish and see how we ultimately like it. And so far it's been a blast. But I think in my head, if we had gone the licensing route, there would be way less risk. Like now we're almost to the point where it's like, all right, now we have to start forking over real cash to make this thing a reality. And that's a jump in and of itself. So when you're licensing, it takes like kind of that risk out of it. But I think it also takes a lot of the, like, to me, the fun, at least for right now. Not saying I would never license a knife. In fact, that it could be a very legitimate reality at some point. If I get into knife designing more and more and like it, then it's a cool way to bring a product to market in a different sphere. But yeah, I think the creative control, especially right now being so new at it, is kind of what allures to me, is most alluring to me.
Yeah.
So it's cool to hear you say that was like, with the Ingress and we Knives, you were in the weeds with them each step of the way, and it's a lot of work, but I mean, I know you've learned a ton because you've been helpful to me as I've talked to you about it.
Yeah, I should give a shout out to Doris at We Knives because she put up with me and a lot of questions. Like I said, the Ingress was my first design, and that whole prototyping process, I iterated, I think, 3 different times, and it took, a full like 2 years to get to that end product. So those are back and forth emails continuously, like them kind of being gracious enough to deal with me and teach me some of the things that I needed to make changes to the design, or it's a lot basically that goes in it behind the scenes that you have to learn. And I kind of wanted to take this design, which by the end of the 2 years, I had designed other things that it's fair to say I probably liked more than the Ingress, but I was like, I'm kind of hitched to this pony right now, and I'm going to ride it out, and I'm going to make all the mistakes that there are to make with this one and learn as much as possible, kind of process A to Z. And then I'll just be so much further on the next ones that, I'll have a much better place to start from. it worked out. I definitely did learn a lot through that process.
Yeah. Would you say that there is are there any lessons in particular that really stuck out, things you didn't expect to learn through that process that were kind of eye-opening for you, or was it just a lot of little things that compounded over time?
Well, and so initially, when I had first made the design, I didn't necessarily know a lot about machining limitations, or like what is going to be the standard size of a ball end mill or an inner fillet that they can use for certain dimensions and like stuff like that. So I kind of had designed this ridiculous thing where, first of all, it had a mechanism on the pivot where it was kind of like a star-shaped pivot, and then there was a set screw that you would tighten into place to basically stop the pivot from free spinning. And not for disassembly, but like the knife would never come loose, basically. Instead of having to use Loctite, you would basically tighten this key on the screw of the pivot so that it couldn't adjust once you set it. It was a weird idea. And then I also had this other feature in the design where it's kind of like a reverse compression lock, which it sounds kind of like a frame lock, but imagine like a cam that comes out from the top of the frame lock and kind of goes into the path of where the stop pin would be, like an arc, and then it goes into this little area and locks in place. Basically functioning like a compression lock, to where if you were to make it fail, you basically have to compress this piece of steel that's wedged in between the blade.
So instead of a standard like lock face where it's just connecting like that, it'd be more kind of into a notch.
Yeah, it was basically you sandwiched this piece of the actual lock bar insert between it was ridiculous. So
it sounds cool. I like the idea of it. Sure.
It was a weird idea, and technically it would work. And actually, I later found out that this was something that Jake Hoback had done. He kind of does a lot of cool, innovative stuff, if you haven't looked into his designs at all. But he has this knife called Paraclete, which has the actual lock that I was trying to design, basically, where it's a very strong lock, essentially. But the problem is it's just extremely hard to manufacture. You're basically hand fitting the lock bar insert into this tiny little area, this like radiused lock face thing. So it's not scalable, basically. So all that's to say, there was some design aspects and manufacturing things that I had to learn going into the project very early on that, like I said, Wee was gracious enough to kind of point me in the right direction of, what's possible, what's not possible, what things I might need to fix. But once you get over that hump, the biggest thing you learn getting into knife design is that designing the knife is by far the easiest part of the process. If you're doing OEM, for sure, everything else is way more complicated and just probably a lot more effort than you probably think going into it.
Right. Well, yeah, because so much of it is more like business decisions at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Like once the design is done and it's like mechanically it works and like maybe even materials have been selected, all that kind of stuff, then it's like the decisions of how many to make and how many in which configuration and all of that back and forth to figure out with the OE, like what that looks like, each of those decisions in terms of your bottom line and their bottom line and timelines. And then it's like, do we do a pre-order? Do we just hope that these sell and we put a ton of money on the line for them? There's like all these things. Like you said, that's way more complex to the average person, me included, than putting pen to paper and drawing a line or sitting down on the laptop and designing it,
Yeah, you got to give a lot of credit to people that do this full time. It's not easy to run a business generally, to start your own business, and knives are no exception, for sure. It's just a lot of logistics, and the business side of it is kind of grueling.
Yeah. And one of the things I've seen just in life in general is a lot of the people who are like geniuses at a like physical, like mechanical type of job, oftentimes just from working like in aftermarket automotive and having to deal with vendors and stuff and machine shops and fabricators, and that a lot of the most talented guys at fabricating or machining, etc., or designing even, are oftentimes really difficult to work with business wise, because that like those two skill sets aren't often super intertwined. They can be, but I've just noticed it a lot of the most brilliant people at doing a very specific thing oftentimes struggle with the business side. And it just makes me appreciate more when I see the makers and the designers who are able to kind of juggle both and like create really cool designs, but also build a brand and have customer service and like do all these things that aren't the same at all as designing the product, you know, and it's sometimes just them. It's really impressive that people figure that out.
Yeah, definitely. It's asking a lot for someone to do both of those things for sure.
Yeah. So when you, or I guess, when did you decide in your process of collecting knives that you were going to design a knife or knives, or like that design was going to be something that intertwined with the hobby and you wouldn't just be a partaker in it, but you'd be somebody who contributed to the products that were out there? When does that like happen in your brain?
Yeah, so it was about a year after I started collecting kind of hardcore. Like I said, it was like January, early 2017 when I got that first Ferrum Forge. And it was actually pretty lucky because pretty shortly after that, they ended up having like a get together at their shop in San Diego. So it's not that long of a drive for me, living kind of LA area. So I had gone to the meetup and actually got to talk to Elliot and Chris for a little bit and kind of pick their brain about knife making. And really the first time I'd ever seen a knife shop and just adjusting to that whole idea that humans make these things like with fairly limited, tools.
Right.
So it kind of planted a seed that this is something that people are actually able to do at that point. But I was still having a lot of fun collecting knives all throughout 2017. I kind of reached a limit towards the end where basically my budget was still not enough for all the knives that I had wanted. So I feel like when that happens, you look for other ways to kind of go deeper into the hobby, whether that's like studying up on metallurgy or getting really big into sharpening, or you find something to do more of it because that's just how we are, I think. So I started messing around with the idea of design, and a few things kind of happened at the same time, which were very lucky. So I was in a group chat with kind of buddies on Instagram. We were all fans of Ferrum Forge and the knives that they had. We kind of collected their customs. They had a anodizer that had like busted after a while, and we kind of all pitched in to buy them a new one. And eventually we just started talking about knife design and like how cool it would be to design something that just the small group of us would be able to have, even if it was something that either Ferrum Forge or somebody else would be able to make on a really small scale. So it kind of got me sketching knives, which I had never really done before. I'm not an artist at all. I'm doing like programming and database stuff as a job. I'm very like technical and not so much artsy. Definitely getting into it more now. So I had started sketching some designs, trying to figure out, I guess, what profiles and things I had liked at the time. And then what had also started happening then was knife podcasts were becoming a big thing for the first time.
Yeah.
So like the Knife Nuts podcast had started coming up. And then there were some interviews with some important people, one of which was Nick Chopran of NCC Knives.
Yeah.
So he's a really interesting maker. I don't know him personally or anything, but
I don't either, but his knives look awesome.
Yeah, he's super cool. So he's a really young guy relative to everyone else, and he basically taught himself how to make knives before he even graduated from like high school. Wow. And just taught himself how to CNC, and basically has built up his business around that. And just the fact that he was like about my age and able to do that kind of thing really kind of blew my mind to the fact that like, oh, this is something even I could possibly get into at my age. For some reason, I had thought the whole time that all these knife makers had been in it for years, or they're older and they're so experienced and they have all this like, I don't know, they have all this experience with tools. Again, I've never worked in a shop or like been very tool savvy or anything. So the idea of making a knife was still pretty foreign. And I wasn't really confident that I'd ever be able to do something like that. But interviews with Nick Chopran was kind of like, okay, here's a young guy who has just from his bootstraps basically self-taught, learned how to do this thing, which is super awesome. And then they also had interviewed Elijah Isham, who was very big at that time, kind of coming out with his breakout designs, his crazy aesthetic. And he was the same age as me, basically doing all this crazy design, CAD work, doing OEM licensing. Later, I found out, Justin Lundquist kind of doing similar stuff. So it was really like I just happened to reach the end of my collecting limits. And then I had started sketching designs just as like this side thought. And then I learned basically that, oh, people actually do this for real though. So all these things kind of came together to like, okay, I feel like I'm not disadvantaged to any of these other people, I don't feel. So why don't I just get Fusion 360, which is free, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know that. Fusion 360, they give out free licenses for. And I just went from there and decided, okay, I'm going to take this thing that I sketched for our group and just try to see if I can model it in 3D CAD. And then from then just started reaching out to different OEMs, trying to figure out if anybody was interested in doing this, if anybody would actually let me OEM through them. And it really took off from there.
That's killer, man. So from the moment that you decided, like, I'm going to design this into 3D, and then I'm going to start talking to OEMs, then like, how long was it from then until you like had a prototype of a knife? Because I think a lot of people probably listening to this, I know I would have if I wasn't already kind of in these weeds right now myself. I'd be very curious what like these timelines look like of like, I have a design I like, I can make it 3D, or I can hire somebody who does CAD and they can make it 3D, whatever that looks like. Now I've got this 3D rendering. How long does that take until you've got one to hold that's made of metal and not like a 3D printed plastic one or something? Like, what did that look like for you?
It definitely depends on mostly how fine-tuned your CAD is. If you're Brian Nadeau from Sharp by Design, you turn in a CAD file that's perfect, and you probably get your prototype back in, I don't know, maybe a couple months, maybe 3 months.
Yeah.
For me, it took over a year.
Okay.
Refining the CAD, making sure that the model basically is what I want, approving all the design revisions, and then just working through OEM's timeline depending on their production. Obviously, as an unknown designer at the time, you're not exactly getting priority treatment or anything. So if they have stuff that they need to manufacture, you're going to get pushed back a little bit. So it takes a little while. Yeah.
Gotcha. So would you say the thing that made it take the most long was like the revisions and things you needed to make along the way, or?
I think so, yeah, for that first one, because like I said, I iterated 3 different prototypes and they were progressively faster. The changes in between each were less and less. I kind of knew immediately getting them in hand, like, okay, these are the things I need to change. I know how to do it in CAD now. So once we got into that kind of a rhythm, it was, only, I don't know, a handful of months at that point for turnaround for prototypes.
Gotcha. That's really cool. So yeah, it's interesting to me, the idea too, that you're like, from when you first drew that knife to when you like were finally happy with the prototype and it was like, this is what it's supposed to be. You said that it had been like 2 years or something, right?
Yeah, it had been, I think, a little over 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's crazy is I think a lot of people, and maybe for some of these guys who like, that's the space they've already been in for a long time, that process might be much shorter, where like they design the knife, it is in design idea what they want, and then they've got it ready in like 6 months to where it's like green light, let's start production. But like, I think it's more common, especially for people who are figuring it out, for it to take a timeline much more like yours, where like, I think you already said 2 years from when you design something, you might feel pretty differently about it now that it's time to bring it to market, because you've evolved as a human being and you appreciate different things than you did 2 years ago. I don't know anybody who has stayed the same person for 2 years. Like, everybody learns things and grows and adapts. But would you say when that moment came and it was like, all right, now it's ready, did you still feel like happy with it? Or was there like I know you wanted to push through and kind of take it to the end, but how did you feel about the knife at the end of that?
Yeah, by the end of it, I think that it was absolutely the best that it could be for what it was and the purpose that I had designed it for. So being a ridiculously tall grinded box cutter, basically, it was everything that I had wanted it to be at that point. I had kind of made all the changes that I wanted. Ergonomically, it was perfectly suited for what I wanted to carry. I don't think there would have been anything else I could change. Like I said, I was designing kind of throughout that time, so there were other designs that I was also excited about getting onto and trying to figure out. But yeah, definitely that design kind of set in my mind as being like a completed thing.
Yeah, that's cool. So do you want to talk at all about where the ingress is now and where things are going? Because I personally, I get asked every now and then by people because they know that we're friends. And I've seen, I think you've shared on Instagram some pictures of updates, or am I crazy?
It may have been for a different design that I'm working on.
Gotcha. Okay. I feel like there was one that looks very similar to the ingress that you put in your stories recently. I mean, that might have been just to me, so I hesitate to say more information.
Yeah, so I think the one you're thinking of is slightly different. It's kind of a newer thing that I was working on, but essentially the ingress, we went through the whole process of the Kickstarter. I think we ended up selling like 90 units in total by the end of it, but the MOQ was closer to like 300 at that time from Wii, so it wasn't enough to do the full production run, so I kind of had to lay it to rest at that time. So I got a lot of feedback from people about what design aspects they were kind of stuck on for the design. And I mean, it's not a broadly appealing thing. I get that it's a very polarizing design for sure. It's probably one of the widest blades that most people have seen, if not the Manix, right?
Right.
But there was also this idea that knowing that I was doing OEM and had to go through Kickstarter, I wanted a knife where I felt there was an argument to make that it was different than anything else, that it was, there's no new mechanisms or anything involved with this, but it is still kind of innovative in the sense that I don't think anybody else was doing or trying to do what I was trying to do and create a ridiculously slicey box cutter, basically. So I wanted to stick with this design for that, but for the rework that I've been working on, which has so many important differences in it that I'm going to end up calling it something else, not the ingress, but it's kind of got the same spirit of the design. It's something that I'm working with a company right now to license through them. So it won't be another OEM project. Okay. Because that's also kind of stressful from customers' standpoints, because they kind of have to join a pre-order or try and support this thing, and they're taking a risk kind of in and of themselves, buying things sight unseen. Yeah. And then they also have to wait another, 5 months or something to actually get the product. So without saying too much, basically, I'm taking the things that I like about the ingress and the things that people were kind of stuck on the design and kind of made them not so much want to jump in on the Kickstarter, and making something that I think people are going to like. It kind of mashes up all those qualities, I think, in the perfect way, and it should reach a better price point, and hopefully people are as excited about it as the ones that were excited about the original ingress.
For sure. It'll be a regress.
Yeah, well, let's not go with that. That sounds like we're making it worse. But
it's true. It does. Yeah. It sounds nice in the sense that I mashed up like you're revising and it's the ingress, but yeah, regress does typically mean going backwards, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So that's another thing on your horizon. And I know that once you've got one of these products to show and to talk about, we're going to be doing another podcast. But I know you're working on a number of knives. What else have you been working on in the meantime? Because I've got a couple of shirts that you have made. I now have both colors. There's been the shirt project. What other stuff has been like occupying your design mind lately?
Yeah, so man, going back to that same thing, it's a lot easier to design a knife than it is to have a knife made. I'm sitting on a lot. I mean, you can see behind me.
It looks like you're trying to figure out who murdered somebody behind you. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the wall of a crazy person, obviously. I'm always designing things and kind of sketching things, and sitting on a lot of CAD basically, but actually getting those through licensing or through OEMs is just a very time-consuming process. So you end up having a lot of downtime, and like I said, I'm getting more into general design and product design and kind of, I guess, more artistic-y things, you could say. So the shirt was kind of an in-between project where it's like, I have this downtime, here's this easy thing that I could do and turn around pretty quickly. I think it's something that people would like. I haven't seen, a lot of merch for knife enthusiasts that is not very like shouting, I like knives at people, right?
Yeah.
So as a enthusiast myself, and not one that generally likes to advertise the fact that I always have knives on me or that I'm really into this non-mainstream hobby, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it would be cool to have other products that are related to knives that knife enthusiasts would appreciate, that aren't like billboarded so heavily, or that are just kind of more subtle, I guess. So I'm working out some ideas in that realm of product design, and the shirts were one of those, and people seem to like it. I'm glad. I actually did 2 runs. The blue was the initial one, and then I had this most recent one in black, which people like too. So it's cool seeing those out and about, and Instagram getting tagged and everything.
Yeah, I get a huge kick out of it every time that I wear that shirt. And now I have both colors, but it's just fun because like even the people who know me really well, who know that I'm super into knives, like we see my sister-in-law and her family like pretty much weekly. And if I wear that shirt around them, they have no idea at all what it's about. But to me, it's like the most knife shirt. It's like next level nerdy knife shirt that just makes it so much more enjoyable. Yeah, if I'm walking down the street, no one knows what that random list of steels is. So that's a lot of fun. Plus, you let me name it, so I feel like I have a connection to it.
Yeah, it was a fitting name. Couldn't really summarize it any better than that. It's a super random thing that only crazy knife people like us would understand or even recognize. So I've yet to encounter anybody in the real world that is able to like pick it out and see what that means. Right. So it might just be a weird Instagram thing for us to enjoy, but that's okay.
Yeah, people would have to Google it, and then even then they might not understand if they did. Killer. So there's knives, there's EDC related things. Do you spend any time designing for anything other than this hobby in this realm, or like between your day job and then designing knives and knife related stuff? Is that like all you design for, or are you secretly also like designing government drones or something? Like, what is there anything else that you work on in your own kind of creative space?
No, not really design wise per se. I kind of mentioned before, I'm not like an engineer or an artist or anything. I went to school for kind of statistics and like programming, analytic kind of stuff. So what I do for a day job is technically design. It's kind of database architecture, database design, and automating through like programming or applications. So it's a similar thought process. It doesn't seem like super related per se, but you're really just problem solving, and you're kind of creating a system that works together well, which is not that dissimilar to when you're designing a knife. Because the way that I design a knife, I kind of start with a sketch, basically, of a profile or an idea that I think will be interesting. And then basically everything from then point on is just problem solving. Like, how can you make this work? How can you fit a pivot assembly and a lock mechanism within these dimensions? Like, how can you fit this blade in this handle? Pretty much everything from then is doing some problem solving techniques, we could say. So that was an interesting exploration of design, and like I said, I'm getting more into like using Illustrator and figuring out how to work out graphics and stuff. I like designing pins or like weird knife related things for sure, but other than like database stuff, if you could call that design, the knife thing is really the only super design heavy hobby that I'm involved in.
I gotcha. Cool. So we got kind of far away from the knives that we collect, and I don't think I meant to. The last I can remember, thought process wise, that we were talking about knives in your collection, you were talking about how now you look for things that are a really good example of being what they're supposed to be in the price range that they're at and for their intended use. What kind of knives do you collect from obviously other makers, other designers that you feel are really good examples lately that you've gotten that are nailing it in their segment?
Yeah, so the thing I carry most days, which I feel like I'm always showing you when we hang out, is my Skiff Culprit, Skiff made
Yeah.
blade. So really cool US-based maker doing custom stuff. So it's basically a father-son team, and the son does all the CNC, like the millwork for the handles, and the dad actually does all the hand grinding of the blades and finishing of the blades, which is really cool. And this is basically as high as I've ever gone in knives and knife collecting. This thing is obviously ridiculous. It's kind of fully dressed and more fancy than most people would ever care to have or use. But
Yeah.
again, it was more of a curiosity thing where I kind of wanted to see what this was like basically at this price point. And this is, not a cheap thing. And they make cheaper ones than this. This is kind of like a fully spec'd out one, but it was also the first fancy knife that I kind of had with like black Damascus accents and like an actual damaged steel blade.
Mm-hmm.
So all those things I wanted to experience and just kind of have that educational experience.
Yeah.
So for what this is, being a high-end custom knife, basically, it's essentially perfection as far as my mind is concerned. Like
Yeah.
everything on this is machined perfectly. The blade grind being done by hand is perfectly symmetric. The finishing is amazing. Like I can't imagine anything topping this knife in terms of quality, which is kind of the reason it's been in my pocket for a year and a half and I use it for everything.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, another knife that I got recently, which is like the opposite end of the spectrum, is this $27 rake knife, which
Yep.
I also really friggin' enjoy. So for what it is at $27, this knife is kind of amazing. Like the action is amazing. It's got a good steel, 14C28N. I
Mm-hmm.
love a worn clip design. And from a design standpoint, this thing is kind of done perfectly too for what it is. So I feel like both of these things are complete opposites, but also represent the same kind of attraction to value and what that can mean at different price points.
Yeah, I dig that. And one of the things that I have always respected about you since the first time I met you is that with that skiff, you genuinely do carry and use and enjoy it. And like, I don't know, there's different types of knife collectors and there are a lot of similarities, but there can be a lot of differences. And I just feel like it's a little bit rare that somebody like picks a nice custom, like one ultimate like kind of grail knife, right? And then gets it and then just actually lets themselves enjoy it for what it's designed to be as a tool instead of all of a sudden like now having 10 customs that rarely if ever get carried. And it seems like you're in a bit of an anomaly in that way where like you use both of those knives, right? There's the $27 knife and the knife that if I were to guess was over $1,000, and just knowing their base prices at Skiff, which is probably what I would do as
Yeah.
a cheap sucker if I were ordering one. But yeah, I just think it's really cool that you're like your use philosophy. I don't think you're a carpenter who's out like doing crazy stuff with your knife every day, but for all of your everyday tasks, it seems like the Skiff is usually kind of what's in your pocket and what gets pulled out to do it. Do you have like, was there ever a hesitancy to use that knife or any of your nice knives, or has it always just been like, I got this for me and I'm going to use it because that's why I bought it? You know, how does that stack up for you?
Yes. we had, I think we talked about this a little recently, how our knife purchasing behavior is a little divergent.
Yeah.
uh, when it comes to knives, I'm not super concerned about the financial aspect as much. It's kind of like if I like something, then I want to get it and I want to use it and try it out. And if it devalues the knife, I'm just kind of like accepting that fact going into it.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm not going to put myself into a knife that I'm not okay with losing money on, basically.
Mm.
Um, just because there's too many knives that I would want to try that I think I wouldn't allow myself to if it was because the market wasn't hyping that design or that designer at that moment in time, or it just wasn't super popular for some reason. Like I can't rely on my own taste to be in the mainstream per se all the time. So it's kind of always been something that I did. It's a great way to lose money for sure, but
Yeah.
it's also way more rewarding, I think, to get a knife that you're kind of pining after and you're researching, and then you really want to test it and see if the performance matches up with what people are saying. You don't just want to follow the hype and kind of see if this thing is, just posting it or just pretending that it's as cool as everybody says it is. I'm kind of more interested in, is this something that I actually want to keep with me? And then giving it a story of like being in my life and actually using it as a tool the way it's supposed to. Which is super cool with the skips too, because I feel like every time I post this on Instagram, they're always commenting or like sharing it or something. So it's really cool that they're that attentive, I guess, as custom makers to people using their knives. And I think it's true of any custom maker. They prefer people to use them and not just keep them in a safe.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like you said, we've talked about how I think the way you put it was like, I have a structure in knife purchasing and like a philosophy and a way that I do it. And I've talked about that a number of times. And your structure or lack thereof is like kind of the antithesis of the way that I do it. But it's interesting hearing you talk about it because I understand it too. And I get what you're trying to say. And like, the times where I have let myself kind of cross that line where it's like, regardless of what this does to the value of this piece, I'm just going to treat it like it's mine, and not like I'm renting it, but like it's mine, and come what may. That can be like a really freeing thing. The way that I treat my Arius now being that way, where it's like my first Arius, I didn't really let myself use it because I was afraid of that depreciation or just ruining something that to me was like so nice. But I think it's worse to like hide something away and not ruin it than to like have the story of using it and ruining it. And so I vibe with that. I think I don't know, maybe I'll try being a little more fearless moving forward.
I mean, it's not, like I said, this is probably not something people should be doing on a large scale. Like I've definitely snapped tips off of $100, $700 custom knives and, just ridiculous things that probably are not suited to people being responsible with their budget.
Yeah.
But, I think it enriches your life a lot more when you get something nice and then you're able to actually incorporate it on a regular basis like that.
Yeah, I think when you operate from a sensation of scarcity, like kind of the way that I do it is like the reason, if I really look back on why I started like that type of buying cycle, was because for me, in order to get new things and figure out what I liked and try new stuff, my budget was really limited. So if I spent $100 on a knife, I needed to know that if I didn't love it, I could get that back out. Or better yet, if I could get 110, or if I could trade it for a knife, because this one a lot of people want, but it just wasn't right for me. So I can trade it for something that maybe there's less hype about, but is worth more. And then I've got that, which if I trade again, and like I could play this game to where I got nicer and nicer knives and my collection got bigger and better. And then like, I just kind of kept that mentality, but it does really genuinely seem like operating from a bit of a place of scarcity where it's like, if I look at my collection now, it's far from scarce. Like there's way too much money and knives sitting in my knife case. And so the idea of losing a little bit on one to have enjoyed it in the process, it's much less scary now when I really sit back and think about it than it was when like every single knife in my collection was a bartering piece. It was like a token to advance in the game. And it's like, it's a different game now. So
yeah, for sure. And I don't want to come off like disparaging anybody who has collections of knives and knives that they don't use. And I think that's super awesome just to collect knives and play with knives, basically. I'm basically faced with a limited budget, and then I'm also always chasing this idea of what the best knife can be. And I feel like the only way to do that is by buying basically another knife and testing it out and seeing how it actually works in my real life. So for what I'm trying to do, that's just how I tend to operate with collecting now.
Hmm.
Although
Do you have
go
a
ahead.
mic on your headphones right now?
There is one, yeah. Was it kind of muffled?
Well, it seems like it's brushing up against you all of a sudden or
Okay.
something. No, you're good.
Hopefully
It
this is
sounded.
better.
I thought like maybe your dog came in the room and was like under your feet moving around or something, and then I realized it was probably just that your mic was hanging down in a funny way.
I think so.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
So
But I was going to say though, because
go ahead.
again, you're doing YouTube reviews, so the way that you collect is going to be based off of content somewhat, right? You're obviously getting stuff you want, but you're feeding the channel. You're kind of cycling through knives really quickly. Sometimes you're letting go of knives that you like just to try other knives. So
Way too often.
yeah. So I wouldn't, how you might collect had you not gone down that road could look a lot different, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and even prior to having the channel, the length of time that I would keep a knife that I loved and just wouldn't be willing to let it go, even though I knew eventually I probably would, was much longer than it is now. Like just today, or maybe it was yesterday. I need to message the guy back. There's a guy with a Holt haptic that he's potentially willing to let go of, and I would really like to try one of those out. I've always wanted a Holt, and I like the haptic better than the Spectre. And on paper, I'm a sucker for warnies, and like just looks really cool.
Yeah.
And so like I don't have the cash to throw out a haptic right now, not even close. So I asked him if he's interested in trades, and he says yes. And so now I need to put together a like chopping block for him of like, here are some things I can trade, at least partially toward it. And it's like I look at my knife case and I love every knife that's sitting in it right now, especially in the range that would make sense to offer him. But now that I've finished reviewing them, and it's harder to find time to put them in my pocket because I'm always working on whatever the newest thing to review is. It's like, as much as if I didn't have a channel, I could keep those knives forever and be happy with them and love them, but like now that I'm in that cycle, it's just like, all right, knives that just got glaringly positive reviews and that I love and that I meant every word about and that I thoroughly enjoy are now on the block because like I don't get to carry them as much now that I'm done. And it's a freaking Holt, like it also makes it simpler when it's a knife that you've like is kind of a grail to like, ooh, that sounds nicer than having these 2 or 3 knives.
Yeah.
I have that one amazing one. So it's just interesting how that like, I don't know, that me having a channel or even just anybody, the spot they're at in life, what their job is, what they're doing, how involved they're feeling like being with the hobby and staying on top of what's new and coming out or like, collecting can have a totally different meaning to people in different phases of life.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like enthusiasts, we kind of, I don't know, we have this like picture of like this gruff dude who has like his one knife that he carries on him for like 50 years of his life, and it's like his reliable friend and tool. And nobody's really like that. Like we're all trying out new knives all the time and buying new things.
Yeah, the people who are like that are not on Instagram talking about it.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm trying my best, I guess. I have, the one knife that I feel like is kind of the perfect tool that I can imagine, at least for that top tier. And that's kind of what I carry almost exclusively. There's things that I'll try if I'm interested in like how something works or if I'm doing like some design research, basically. But for the most part, I like the idea of having a reliable tool that is your sole object that you kind of carry with you. I feel like that's how I would like to be.
Yeah, no, I like hearing you verbalize that makes so much sense to me because in my mind too, it's like when you think about why you carry a knife, it shouldn't need to be a case of 50 knives to get that objective met, right? Of like, yeah, I don't know. The vision in my mind is nowhere near that complex, but I make it that complex because it's fun for me. It's a pastime and I enjoy it. But yeah, like the idea of having a trusty tool, whether that's a folder or like if I'm outdoors, it's my fixed blade that I've had for 20 years. And like someone asks me about it, I got stories about it. Like that sounds like the kind of man I want to be, but like in the meantime, I'm constantly in a buying frenzy. And right now, at this moment, I have like 4 knives in transit to me. And it's like, it doesn't stop. And so I wonder if at one point it'll get to the point where it does. And it's like, now I'm happy. So that's really cool that for you, the skiff has kind of done that, at least for a reasonably long period of time compared to most people, because there's no knife that I've ever carried. I guess prior to being in the hobby, there were probably knives that I'd carry for a like solid year, and that would be the one. But like once I got into the hobby, that cycle just got so fast. So the fact that in the midst of being deep in the hobby and being on knife Instagram and being a designer of knives and EDC things, that you can still find a knife that like you're happy to put in your pocket every day, and you don't like crave that variety enough to not do it, you know?
Well, I am human, we'll say. So I still get that itch to buy a knife.
Yeah.
And I think that's why lately I've been looking for things of value, because it's kind of the same hit if we're talking about it like a drug. So, buying this $27 rake knife is still pretty fulfilling in terms
Still
of
get you
getting
high.
something
Yeah.
new that's cool to play with. And I recently bought a Spyderco Stretch that I told you about.
Yep.
I was doing a sprint run in K390, which is pretty cool, and it's a design that I wanted to try out since they came out with the straight spine variant of it. I think it looks really cool. But even more recently, the thing that I've kind of been stuck on are these grandpa knives, which I also showed you. But GEC, basically, it's kind of been coming up. I feel like I'm seeing it a little more on kind of more mainstream, like Instagram and Instagram accounts, and maybe YouTube channels. But for, again, what it is, being a slip joint knife that's made kind of by hand in America and having different kinds of materials, it's an amazing value for what it is. It's kind of an easy thing to collect. So lately, this has kind of been the thing that's captured my interest and my dollars.
Sure. And yeah, I think it's interesting the point you make about it still, like, it's still being able to scratch that itch, and you don't have to play a crazy, like, high dollar game to kind of feed that that desire, because like a GEC, I know there's variance in price, but I feel like a lot of them I see are like 70 to $100, right?
Yeah.
That's not, all things considered, crazy relative to what a lot of people spend on other knives. Like,
yeah,
the amount that I have coming and going of knives all the time is kind of gross when I think about it. But yeah, it's interesting because we've talked before too about, like, I haven't started really playing like the customs game so much yet, but I also like used to play the budget game, and I don't really all that much anymore.
Yeah.
But even then, you're right. When I get a good budget knife, it can still be every bit as exciting as any other new knife.
Yeah.
Like, if it's good design and it's executed well, then it's that same excitement still hits. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm saying that because I have this custom that I can always go back to, that's always in my pocket. So I feel like that quells most of my desire to buy more expensive things. I do still buy customs every now and then just to kind of see. There's makers that I might want to try for the first time, or just kind of see what the quality is there. And it's probably something you're gaining curiosity about, like,
Yeah.
what exactly does that dollar amount buy you? What is that experience like? And I'm sure you'll do that eventually, and that'll be some fun YouTube videos. But yeah, definitely, I'm kind of stuck on knives of value and looking at things that I wasn't looking at before. I mean, like you said, these GECs, they're relatively cheap. They're not easy to get right now just because the demand is really high. So getting on drops or pre-orders, that kind of thing, is kind of tricky.
Yeah.
And they are, in that way, maybe more people are encouraged to get them, because then you'll be able to get your money back out of it on the secondary market, which is kind of a nice safety net. But like I said, for what it is, I mean, you cannot beat this blade geometry. It's only $10.95, but still, I mean, it's going to cut better than a lot of custom knives that I've handled that are thousands of dollars, that are not, they don't feel like they're made to be tools, or maybe that they were made more to be looked at than used, which I don't tend to appreciate or value as much as something simple that works really well.
For sure. Would you say, I guess, how much do you think you're affected by like the FOMO of knife buying? Because I think a lot of people are heavily motivated by the fear of missing out, right? Like, and I see it even just in comments in my comment sections, where constantly, if I post a knife that I happen to get on a drop, which I play that game a lot, and it does motivate me, the fear of missing out. But like, I see a lot of people in comment sections, mine and otherwise, who are like, dang, I missed it. Like, oh, bummer, I missed that one. I really hope they do another run. Like, well, like, and I think that's a huge motivator for people to not just buy, but to like buy constantly, because and it's like everybody's playing that game now, right? Limited runs and like the whole scarcity, whether it's manufactured or actually because people can't make enough. If they're like TRM, who is trying to make as many knives as they can and just can't satiate what people want. Like, do you feel like that FOMO motivates you to buy things, or are you more like sit back and calculate about it? And what's that equation for you?
So, I mean, like I said, I'm not very structured when it comes to knife buying. There's not too much calculating that really goes on behind the scenes. But at this point, I'm designing my own knives, and I'm kind of understanding a lot more what I appreciate in knives and knife design. And I feel like I have fine-tuned the skill to be able to see something like in a picture and kind of judge like I would like that, or I know I'm not going to like that because of this feature. So really, it's kind of like, if I see it, do I like it? And if I like it, then I'm going to research it and see, like, is the price right for what it is? Do I think there's good value there? Then there's a good chance I'll pick it up if that's true.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
do you find yourself feeling like really bummed if you missed something? Like if you went through those steps and you were too late, and it's like by the time you thought, yes, I would like to have that one, they're all sold out. Is that something that bothers you, like to your core, or do you just let that roll off?
Ooh. I mean, if it's something that I really want, that's going to be a bummer for sure. I don't think that's avoidable, but
Right.
I don't know that I'd go so far to say that just because people are sad, that means it shouldn't be the case that things are limited. There's a lot. People get really angry about missing drops for sure, and they take it out on makers or manufacturers, and it kind of gets kind of ugly sometimes. And even then, knowing how hard it is to produce a knife and what goes into the manufacturing, like planning runs of knives is not a super easy thing. So on the one hand, I can understand why things need to be limited. And then on the other hand, it's just kind of cool that there are limited things that only certain people get to have and appreciate. As long as it's not functionally, I guess, that much better. Usually you can get some variant of a design, right? It's not usually the case that something's completely sold out. Otherwise, it's really just a time factor. You're waiting for hype to die down, and then usually there's still something that you can get on the secondary.
Right. Well, yeah, like even just a couple of years ago, thinking back on it, like to get a spot for a Norseman was like really, really difficult to come by, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like I've been offered the spots that they were able to get a handful of times, and I see them on the secondary regularly in brand new condition. And like, if I want a Norseman now, it's a totally different game than it was just a couple of years ago, which if a couple of years ago I had to have one, then like that's frustrating, right? But you're right. It's usually a time game where even like TRM, who I just cited, like as time goes on, it gets easier and easier to get an Atom if you want one. Like if you're a little bit patient at all, you can get one because the drops are somewhat regular. People are moving them on the secondary. It's not crazy inflated. If you do have to have one right now to get one secondary, like the game becomes easier to play. But it's so much of the like the now that drives that frustration. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I forget who it was you had mentioned that. Yeah, it is kind of a healthy thing to have a secondary market that is vying for something like that.
Yeah.
I think it kind of benefits everybody when people are making stuff that people want, and they continue to want it even after they're sold out.
Yeah, I mean, and like selfishly, if I think of myself, right, if the knife that I'm working on was available for purchase today, if there were more people that wanted to buy it than could buy it, that would be a great thing for me, right?
Yeah.
And it would also incentivize me as a designer or maker or whoever, whatever you want to call it, the business of this knife. It would incentivize me to make more of them sooner. And if that cycle continues, then it drives me to keep pushing and pushing and pushing to make more and put out new stuff. And like having that kind of fuel behind you of demand for your product really accelerates things. Whereas you see some people who come out with a design, whether it's like their first design or they've got a whole catalog of whatever it is, say like ProTech puts out a knife that like the Malibu and the Mordax they can't seem to make enough of. But if they come out with another knife where it's another godson and like retailers buy them and they're readily available for months and months and months, then like for ProTech, that's much less favorable in terms of them making more knives than having knives that have hype and demand and sell out as soon as they hit the shelves. And
Yeah.
it like fuels that fire. And so I don't know. I think it's also, it makes the hobby, I would say, arguably more fun when the secondary does that kind of thing. And there are things that increase in value. And like, I don't know, it makes Pokemon cards more fun. It makes Jordans more fun. Like there are a lot of things that are more fun to collect because when you get something that does go up in value, then like that's cool. You've got an appreciating asset. You can play with that appreciation by liquidating it, or you can keep watching. Like it's just this fun thing that happens. And like, I don't know, you just kind of have to take the losses when they come and it stings. Like I
Yeah.
wanted an Oz machine or OZ machine. I never know how to say it. Spot on his books the last time they opened and missed it. And like, I was butthurt for sure. I was like that stung,
Yeah.
but like his books will open again. I know when, but I'm not going to say when because I hope less people know this time. But like, it's just like, you move on and you chase another thing. And there's so many knives constantly coming out too that like if all you're chasing are Spyderco drops and you're getting so bummed that you missed a PM2, like try another brand too, you know, try something else where like put that same money you were planning on spending on that and try something different.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much variety at this point that we're like, as consumers, there's never really been a better time to be into buying knives.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of choices. People they complain a lot about secondary prices for sure, and there's some merit there. But I mean, generally, knives are going to be worth what people are willing to pay for them,
Yep.
and
If you feed the scalpers, they'll keep on scalping.
kind of yeah, it's kind of how capitalism works, right? But I mean, there's something I've been thinking about recently where I don't think you want to get that so out of control to where there's such a profit to gain from kind of either, I don't know, scalping knives, basically jumping on drops just so you can resell them, or even just generally with custom makers, anything like that. I think one of the reasons that the knife community is such a cool place is because most people, or at least a lot of people, are doing this because they like it, not because they're making money doing it.
Right.
And I think that people kind of wish, or they were kind of waiting for like when knives are going to become mainstream and like famous people are going to start carrying them and it's going to become this big thing. But I also kind of worry that with all that popularity, once there's all this money to be had in knives, I feel like it's not going to be this cool, tight-knit thing where people are just doing cool things and making cool things because they want to, and it's, it could potentially become something else. So, there's some bad things that happen when lots of money and profiteering and stuff gets involved.
Yeah, it's still pretty hipster to be a knife maker. And I'm sure knife makers will hate that I said that, but I think you're right. I think with like, I've heard like you, a number of people say that it would be awesome for the knife community to explode and to get huge. And like, as somebody who would like to make a living in this industry, there's part of me, and you, I'm sure as well, with like wanting to have designs that are brought to market. You want buyers to buy those designs. But I think the danger, more so than that growth happening of like a lot of people getting into it, is that if it happens overnight, then that dramatically shifts the culture of it.
Yeah.
And the culture of the knife community is like, it's got its faults. It's not perfect for sure, but it is a special, unique environment where it's got its own etiquette and its own way about it. And so, yeah, I think if tomorrow something happened where on the Joe Rogan podcast, he's got me on it and all we talk about is knives, and then there's twice as many knife enthusiasts the next day, like, I don't know that that would actually be good for it. Like, I don't think those people would be as into it as if they had like went through the progression of finding it on their own.
Yeah, I think it's a weird thing that happens because even for myself, that's what happened is I'm not surrounded by anybody growing up who was into knives at all. And then for some reason, there's just this thing inside of me that's like, I want to have a knife. I want to shop for knives all the time and learn as much as I can about knives. And then I stumble across this Instagram world of people that like knives. And then it's just like this crazy thing where you run and you're like not alone in this weird hobby that you just discovered. And I think it's really cool that people have stories like that, or they're progressing through knives and we kind of relate to one another in a really similar way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if it would be exactly the same if it had exploded like that. Actually, speaking of Joe Rogan's podcast, there is an episode with Maleko Malmasi of Malmasi Fire Arts. He does this crazy pattern welded Damascus chef knives, culinary knives mostly. But he actually has been on Joe Rogan once. It's a pretty cool episode about knife making, more like fixed blade stuff. So it's not the custom world of folders and everything, but still worth checking out. Also, his Instagram is like bonkers. It's the craziest Damascus you've probably ever seen.
Yeah. Now I'm going to look up that Joe Rogan episode. I'm curious. I don't think I've heard it. Yeah. I think in my mind, it's kind of like, imagine if you're a relatively small town and your population is 40,000 people. I don't know what an actual small town is. I've lived in Southern California most of my life, but if you're in a small town, population is 40,000. If in the course of a month, you have it double to 80,000 people, the infrastructure of that town isn't really built to handle it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of the stores and restaurants will be happy because there's a lot of money to be made. But I think a lot of the residents of that town would feel constricted all of a sudden and claustrophobic because this space that they're used to having some wiggle room in is now like super full. And I think that may not be a perfect example, but literally if the knife community just like exponentially grew at a really, really quick rate, it would be harder to like keep that culture going and like keep that small town feel, like if it felt more like a big city, it wouldn't be the same thing. And that's one of those things where it's like growth is good, but how much growth is sustainable and scalable? And like, there's definitely plenty of room. I'm not saying I want it to be an exclusionary type of space, but I think it's an interesting point you bring up where like that growth isn't necessarily maybe what we actually want.
Yeah, it's just like a be careful what you wish for kind of thing. And I mean, they make niches within niches. So Facebook groups are really big right now with how Instagram's algorithm has been kind of unpredictable. So that's been a really fun place to explore smaller groups of more focused collectors if you're into a specific maker or a specific brand. Also shout out to the Great Eastern Cutlery Club on Facebook. Also a really fun group, but there's the Spyderco, the group that you're kind of moderating now. So
yeah, the Millie Club.
There's different places to go, I think, if you want a more community feel than just the broad world of Instagram. So that's nice too.
Yeah. I forget who I was just talking to about this recently, but it's like the different spaces for EDC are each kind of really different when you analyze how interaction happens on them. And it's interesting too to realize, like, if you go to a knife show, a lot of people in attendance at those knife shows are not the people that you're seeing in the Instagram knife community or on the Facebook knife community.
So with exception, I would say the USN gathering. The USN gathering is like the place where Instagram people go, I think. Gotcha. I've only been once, but it has been my experience that, other shows are really fun. Obviously, I've never been to Blade Show, but like Cali Custom Show is a decently big show with some really big names and makers that go there. But you definitely do run into just random like casuals or normies or a bunch of people that aren't as deep into it as we are.
Right.
But I think there's smaller pockets of things, and I think, like I said, if you can go to the USN show, if they ever bring that back, whenever they do, that's a really fun one because it is definitely people that are deep into this hobby.
Yeah. And they do that one in Vegas, right?
Yeah, they did it in Vegas for a good while.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if that one happens. Yeah, knife shows are an interesting thing moving forward. I just yesterday was talking to my wife about Atlanta, and I'm definitely not going to Atlanta after that conversation. But a Blade Show West now supposedly is going to be in Long Beach in October, which will be dope for you and I. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Like, I think that's probably kind of a good indicator of like who's really into knives in a certain sense, if they're willing to not just engage on the internet, but get to a show about knives. Then like, I mean, that if people are traveling to somewhere that's more than a few minutes away to go look at knives for an entire day, it's an interesting indicator. But I don't know. I've only been to California Custom Knife Show, which is relatively small.
Yeah, even then though, I mean, you kind of eventually, as you get connected, you find like people that you mesh well with, and you can meet up at shows. Sometimes you find local people that's really cool, or people that are, like I said, driving into a show. So usually there's a group of people you can find that are like-minded, and you can just kind of appreciate the same stuff within the knife world.
Yeah, even so, this year was my 3rd year at CCKS. And it was the first time that I went to the show having friends who would be there, because you were there, and then we hung out with like Chris from Cerberus and Jacob from Jacob Creates and Alex's Knife Box and Dirk Werning, and like there was this group of people there that it was the first time that there were people who like before the show I was texting with and like, yep, we're gonna meet up, we're gonna hang out, and it was like a lot of fun to do so. And it's a different experience when that's the way you go into it, for sure, because the first time I ever went, it was just me. And then the second time I brought a buddy who's not into knives at all. So that was its own weird experience of like trying to explain everything that was happening to him. But
a funny story about that. I think I told you, but I think it was the 2nd year that I went to CCKS, and I thought I would bring my dad because it would be a cool, like, he's into knives generally, and he collects a lot of guns and likes doing gun kits and stuff. So I thought he might have fun at the show, but it is very hard to explain, like, why is this knife $1,500 or why is this thing cool? I had brought him over to Enrique Peña's table, who was selling some front flippers, which also he had never seen before. So I kind of take one, and I'm flicking it in front of him to show him how it works. And he's like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I hand it to him, and he tries to, flick it over the top with his finger, and immediately just drops it on the table, onto the floor, like right in front of Pena. And I feel horrible about it. I just kind of put it back on the table and have to walk away. It's a weird thing, bringing non-knife people to knife shows for sure, but it could be kind of fun too.
Yeah. The buddy I brought, luckily, is just a very enthusiastic person in general. He and I joke because we're like, he's one of my best friends. He's the buddy I just went and stayed a couple months ago in Portland with. And he's like super outspoken, super kind of loud, and like just kind of the opposite of me in some ways. Like, we went on a hike while I was up there to a waterfall, and afterwards we were talking about it, and he thought I like didn't enjoy it at all because I'm not the most loud, boisterous person. And the whole time he's like, wow, look, there's a waterfall. And I'm like, yeah, cool, but like in my head, I'm really enjoying it. I'm not that like outward in general. People who watch my channel might find that weird because I'm talking to a camera the whole time, but like, I'm actually a pretty introverted person in general. And so it's just funny bringing him to a knife show because like, we only stayed a couple hours, but he was very like enthusiastic the whole time, and like trying to make sure I knew that he liked it, and was like asking me questions about the stuff because he's just that kind of guy. But we still joke about it. He's from what's it called? He's from Wyoming. And I guess up there, they used to have this like Jim Bridger knife and gun show every year. And I guess Jim Bridger was like an old fur trapper. Like Stephen Ranella talks about him sometimes in one of his books. Anyways, he's like a Daniel Boone type of guy. And so in my buddy's like the main town near where he lived, they had the Jim Bridger show. And so all the time when he talks to me, he's like, "You go to any Jim Bridger shows lately?" Like that's what I took him to. It's like definitely not the vibe of California Custom Knife Show.
Yeah.
He was a good sport about it.
That's cool though. I don't know. It's always fun getting people who aren't in the world to kind of check something like that out. Like I constantly, when I'm designing something or if I have a prototype, I'm looking for opportunities to show it to people who like know nothing about knives. In some ways, that's kind of the best feedback you can get is like, what do you think of this thing that you know nothing about? Is it cool? What don't you like about it? Like, I find that feedback is so different from what anyone else will tell you that it's actually sometimes more useful. So it's cool hanging out with those people too.
Yeah. Well, it can be an echo chamber, right? If all you're talking, the only people you're talking to about a subject are the people who are like, that's all that they do, then it's that echo chamber can be a little bit dangerous. I think it's a double-edged sword though, because also, I don't know. I think some designs feel very much like they're a knife for an enthusiast. It's like, it seems like no, like broad, like nobody who doesn't get your "if you know, you know" shirt would think that knife is cool, but the people who do get it do appreciate it. But yeah, that's an interesting design quandary.
Well, yes and no, I think, because while it is something that I try to do is design things that I would like as an enthusiast, so design features that really only people deep in the hobby would care about, or using premium steels that only crazy people basically would find the need to have, but
or
at
know
the same
the difference
time, basically. Still though, there are things that are so obvious that something needs to be designed for humans, and any human can relate to, because any human has hands and they need to be able to grip a knife without it being painful, or they have some impression of like how useful a thing will be, or is this just ridiculous? A lot of those I feel like we get in our heads about, like all these crazy ways that we're going to use things, or whether something's practical or not. But I find it really useful to get that feedback about like, all right, I'm just going to hand you this. It's got all these crazy materials and things, but that means nothing to you. This is just like a piece of crap that I just handed to you. Does it feel good in your hand, or do you care about it? Because I feel like sometimes, hand something really cool to a knife person and it's not comfortable, but they'll be like, "Oh wow, I've never seen this before. This is super cool," and they'll just kind of fluff it, and you won't really get the necessary feedback that you need. So certain things I would still look for those people to get feedback on.
Yeah, no, that actually makes a good bit of sense. Like when I think about, I've got two brothers, and one of them is much more into knives than the other. Both my brothers and my dad have carried knives my entire life. They're all like knife carriers, right? And they appreciate nice knives. And but my oldest brother is kind of a collector. Like he buys a decent fair bit of knives, and that's one of the things that we kind of bond over. Is he'll message me like, "Hey, did you see this is coming out?" And he's like kind of into it, but anytime he needs to sell something, he like has me sell it for him because he doesn't want to deal with that side of it. Anyway, my other brother, he carries a knife every day. A lot of the time it's a bug out, or I gave him a steel will at one point, like one of the nicer cut jacks. That was years ago now, but like he has gotten a couple of knives, mostly from me or my other brother or my dad have given him nicer knives, and he just doesn't want to spend his own hard-earned money on nice knives. So he's very frugal about it. And it's interesting because every time that I'm over and see him, I always have a knife or a couple of different knives that he's never seen because I'm always carrying new stuff. And some of the knives that he really, really likes as someone who just wants to carry a knife and use it are like so different from the knives that I'm most excited about. And a lot of the ones that I get most excited about, he doesn't get at all. And he's like aggravated by them that someone would make that type of thing. Like I had the Hellhound Bounty Hunter Ultra Tech, And he was like, what is this? Like, what gas station did you buy this from?
Yeah.
And he thought it was worth like $30. He thought I was tricking him. And it was like, dude,
Oh,
that's like a
geez.
$500
Yeah.
OTF. And he was like repulsed by it. And it's just funny because it's like, that's one of the nicer OTFs that you can buy, right? And a lot of knives that are like kind of eccentric in a way that get people in the community excited. He's like, I want my bug out all day, every day, because it works and it's a tool and it's light and I enjoy carrying it. It's
Yeah.
like, it's an okay answer too. Like, he's not wrong. It's just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's different. And I've had a bug out and I love that bug out. I actually gave it away a little while back. Super amazing knife. For a lot of people, that is probably where they would stop. I mean, that's all the knife anybody would need. And it's probably more of an issue as you get more popular or you're selling more knives. As a designer, as a maker, especially if you like catch the hype, as it were, then I feel like you run into issues where you might have a hard time trusting people's opinions or feedback. And I guess it depends on what your goal is. Because this is a side hobby for me, when I'm designing something, I'm not doing it to sell knives. I'm not, the way that my personality just works, I think, is I just kind of want to learn as much as I can about something, and I want to gain some mastery over a skill. So even when it comes to knives, what I'm trying to do is just like, can I design something really well that's a functional tool that does what it's supposed to, that doesn't have hotspots and issues, and I'm trying to stay really distant from it, just to improve my own skill, not necessarily just to keep throwing products at a market that's already oversaturated, basically. It's different mentality, I think.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast as well that I really liked was how a lot of designers and their designs. I'm trying to remember the way you put it, and now it's eluding me. But the way I took it was kind of like a lot of the designs that are received really well are like unapologetically a designer just making what they're passionate about, and it's not about fitting it into a price range or for a certain slot in a catalog or
Yeah.
anything like that. And instead it's like, what is the product that I want, that I would appreciate, and why do I appreciate those things too? Not just like, am I putting it in the colors I want, but like you said, making sure for you, hot spots are unacceptable. Cutting geometry is important. Like, what are these things, these ingredients that you need to have in a knife that frankly aren't present in every knife? There are a lot of knives that exist that have hot spots or do not have good cutting geometry, or like there are these things that you or I might consider flaws. And so for you, like setting out to design something that you feel accomplishes that goal, I think is a cool way to look at it. And a lot of the products that I like seemingly are the ones that seem most fearless, where it's like a designer's putting themselves into this product and it's not about fitting it into a certain spot, but it is like a representation of that person. And not just knives, but like music and movies, and like the movies that are designed to be like do really well in China because that's where the most money comes from. Like, I don't want to watch Transformers another time. We don't need another one of that movie. But instead, like a Christopher Nolan film, which is like super well thought out, and you can trace that he was the mind behind it in each of his films. Like, that's the movie I want to watch. And so I like that way of looking at the design process or the creation. And I think it's cool that that's the way you go about it, is it's not like, how do I meet a bottom line of sales? And like, where does this fit in my online catalog? Or, like, I think that for some people might be the right way, but I wouldn't agree that it is.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why I like having the feedback from people who aren't in the know, because if it's not a tool, if it's not doing what it's supposed to, if it's not something that, like my skiff, it's the one thing that someone could own and carry with them and use it reliably, then I feel like it failed somehow. Somewhere in the design process, something went wrong and you made it for some other purpose than just being basically a tool that it should be.
Yeah.
I also think why it's so important that we still have custom knife makers who you could argue don't make as perfect of things as CNC machines or, these large scale production companies. I think if we're going to continue to innovate and kind of grow and evolve as a knife community and just general knife design, then it's so important to keep supporting custom makers and the type of innovation and just like artistic creativity that they continue to crank out basically all the time. And it's nice to see, people are obviously still buying custom knives all the time. And I try to support and buy custom knives when I can. And I'm looking forward to whenever you're going to step into that arena and see how that goes. You get a different experience working with makers, getting to know them as humans, and it's definitely a different world.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. It's interesting too, like the recent podcast I did with Brian Brown Knives. I've liked looking at his customs online for a long time. And I've always thought he's like a maker who his work, at least, I really like, but I'd never spoken to him. Hadn't had the opportunity or the chance to do so or whatever. But after doing that podcast with him and like getting to know who he was a little bit, and we've talked a few times since, it makes me way more enthusiastic about the idea of like, right now his wait times for me are a little longer than I'd want to sign up for. But if he gets to a spot where like I can get one of his spots for a point in time that I think is reasonable and I have the budget available that I can buy one of his customs, like I would love to do that process with him. And you hear people talk about buying from the maker, right? Like you're buying the maker as much as you're buying the knife. That's something that gets thrown around a lot. And I get a small sense of that from buying production versions of knives from makers that I really like, because I still feel like I'm supporting them and there's an element of that. But yeah, I can totally see how if you went down the full custom route and you're like speccing a build with this person and they're updating you on how it's going and sending you progress pictures, and then afterwards, like the skiffs are with you, they're loving seeing that interaction where you're using it and showing it, and like they have that sense of pride and so they feel like they're close to you. Like that's a really cool dynamic that I don't think you could really get without that process.
Yeah, I think you'll, as you go through this project designing something too, you'll kind of get a sense of what that's like, knowing the people that might end up using the knife that you're designing. I could only imagine that would be the thing that makes you happiest, is seeing somebody else have your knife and they're using it and they're carrying it with them, and that's like their EDC.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the idea just in my, like already now when people like pick up one of my shirts from Teespring and show that they have one of my shirts, that already is like kind of weird for me and really cool. But the idea of it being like a knife that like someone, especially in my mind, if it's like someone's out on a hike and that is the knife that they put in their pocket to do the kind of thing that I like to do with my knives, where I feel like I bond with them, and someone is like getting that out of something I created, it seems wild to me. So hopefully my knife is good enough that people want to do that, and get something out of it. But yeah, it's got to be, I'm learning over time how many like subdivisions within the hobby there are, and kind of how meaningful they are, I guess, even more so than that they exist. Because like when you get into the hobby, there's makers, there's reviewers and content creators, that there's collectors, that there's Strider guys and CRK guys and Hinderer guys. And, that there's all these groups within the group, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like the more that I sample each one and actually like more than just dip my toes in, but try to like get to the bottom of it and figure out like, what is it like to design a knife? What is it like to really get deep into Facebook and be a moderator of a big knife group? What is it like to like all these like experiences I'm having? I just keep finding new depth or more powerful experiences. I don't even know how to describe that.
Yeah, the rabbit hole just keeps getting deeper for sure. But that's kind of the nice part. There's always something more you can focus on. Like I said, if you're big into metallurgy or sharpening, there's so much you can do just in that small arena. So even when you're just focusing on what seems like a really specific part of knives, you just find out that that's way more complicated than you even thought it was.
Yeah. And there's usually cool people in that space who will help you along and like
Yeah.
explain it for you and that you can get to know. Would you say so within the hobby itself? I know you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook. I don't know if you do Reddit or anything like that. Do you have kind of a favorite like spot where you find you get the best interaction out of, or uh, anything that's been most meaningful for you in terms of like the way the community works?
I mean, so I am primarily on Instagram since I started collecting back in like 2017, and I enjoy the photography part of it. I think that's a big thing that I appreciate with just Instagram and knife collecting is that it's somehow weirdly intertwined with the hobby of photography, and
Hmm.
fancy cameras and editing and all that stuff have gotten kind of bigger into that. So getting to swap tips with other like photographers, even more so recently, I feel like there's been this really big influx of legit professional photographers that are posting some really crazy super cool stuff on Instagram.
Yeah.
That's been really fun to kind of participate in, and I'm glad that Instagram still exists for that. But I've also been spending a good amount of time on Facebook, mostly in this GEC group,
Mm.
the Great Eastern Cutlery Club group, which has been a different experience for sure. It's nice that they're focused on a very specific thing, and then it's also a very different culture than you would experience on Instagram, and that's probably because it is traditional knives more so than just a smaller group of people. But uh, I like them both, I think, in different ways, and
Mhm.
I wouldn't really want to give up either one of those, but you use them for different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to, I think it might have been Brian Brown or I don't know, somebody recently. I was talking about how Facebook is in itself very unique because of the way you can comment. like, like Instagram is so likes focused, right? Which is interesting too. Today, my wife's likes got taken away because she's a larger account. So they've been
Hmm.
saying for a long time that it'll no longer show how many people liked your picture. So
Yeah.
like right now, it'll say Nitch Designs liked my photo and 600 and something others. Now on hers, it just says such and such liked your photo and others. It doesn't say a
Huh.
number. And
Yeah.
so even when you click on the image, it still just shows that. So you'd have to be like a business account and go back end to see how many likes it actually got, which they've
Hmm.
been saying they want to do so that people are, I don't know, killing themselves less over getting less likes. Like I would
Yeah.
assume is their mentality. But my point is like Facebook is so different because the likes are important there, but more so is like the comment section. That's when threads really take off.
Yeah.
And because you can reply with other pictures that you've taken and with GIFs and with memes and like all of and like comments can be threads where there's threads within the thread, like it's I don't know, it's just an advantage I think over Instagram in terms of the actual back and forth communication. Whereas Instagram, it's like I think for me the most valuable back and forth I get is in like group chats and DMs. The posts themselves are like a cool gallery to see what other people are up to, and
Yeah.
like you said, all the photographers are really impressive. But part of me wonders over time if there will be more of a shift towards Facebook, or whether like something else actually does take that over, where you have the really artistic element, but you also have the interaction. Or I don't know. I'm curious to see what happens in the
Yeah, I
future.
mean, I don't see anything replacing Instagram anytime soon. I know there were some other social media platforms that had popped up where people kind of try to transition to because Instagram's kind of got a weird monopoly on this thing. But in terms of its ability to connect all these different spheres together with like hashtags, and it's unique in that way of basically building this very broad community. I think Facebook is great, like you said, for the smaller subsets of things, for
Mhm.
getting deeper conversations with people. It's almost like the new like forums, I guess what forums used to be,
Yeah.
where people would go to have a little bit more interaction than you could get just by sharing a picture or liking a photo, like you said.
Hmm.
So I think we'll have both probably for a good time.
Yeah. So you brought up those photography accounts, and I want to say it might have been, I think you were one of the people who I didn't understand when it started happening that there were a lot of like pirate accounts. And I don't mean like they were like intellectual property pirates, like people who like fly the flag, like Skull and Crossbones,
Yeah.
pirate, like lots of like black and brass and like moody yar matey like type of pictures. And I didn't understand it when it started happening. And I say this all very tongue in cheek because now I'm friends with a lot of the guys who are really like deep into that. But I think you were one of the ones I put on my stories. It has to be close to a year ago now. Like, why all of a sudden are there all of these like pirate themed accounts?
Yeah.
Do you think, like, A, what do you think about that? And B, do you think that's ultimately good, bad? Do we need more of like movements like that bring people in? How do you stack up on the whole, the pirates on Instagram?
Yeah, it's such an interesting kind of case study, I guess. I'm pretty sure most of that is attributable just to Peter McKinnon on
Yeah.
YouTube and how he's kind of popularized that aesthetic and within the photography community. So a lot of people who came as part of that are very professional photographers or, you know, professional hobbyists at least. And it was it's kind of one of those things like we were talking about where, okay, we're going to popularize this thing that you like, these knives, and we're going to influx a lot of people, and we're kind of going to see what happens. And not a lot of people actually like that, it turns out.
Yep.
For the most part,
There was resistance to it, and me included at first. I was like, why do all of these accounts have a CRKT squid and all of their posts are like they're using the same preset seemingly, and it all looks the same, but it's a ton of accounts, and I didn't understand it, so I kind of hated on it. I was going to start a fur trappers guild to battle them, but I didn't.
Which still, I think is a great idea. But besides that, I think it's a good thing. It's super great. I don't think it's ever, you know, a bad thing to have an influx of people that are really passionate about the same thing. That's, if anything, that's encouraged a lot of other people to get more creative with their photography. So I feel like it's become a more interesting place to go look at pictures, to be honest. And those people are doing other creative things within knives. Just generally, it's creating a richer experience, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's cool that a lot of them are, I know some of them are international, and that's why they can really only get their hands on certain knives, certain budget knives maybe. But showing that, you know, knives of any price point can be as cool as anything else that anybody's carrying through pictures. I think that's been a healthy change.
Yeah, no, I've grown to really appreciate it over time. And I think the first hesitancy I had was just I didn't understand where it was coming from.
Yeah.
I've never been into Peter McKinnon. I didn't follow him. I still don't. Not that I have anything against him. It's just I don't think I'm really his audience. But like the fact that when I first started seeing them all, they all looked so the same. It was like, where is this coming from? All of a sudden, there's twice as many people in my town as there used to be, and they're all wearing pirate clothes. Like it just seemed a little weird. But over time, yeah, the kind of proof has been in the pudding, I think, where you've seen a lot of really good photography, regardless of what gear was in it. Whereas for a long time, it was very like, what gear do you have? And the wrong gear is not welcome here. And so I think that's good. And also you've seen, or I've noticed a lot of those guys have stayed and have gotten deeper and deeper and deeper into the hobby, where now they have a big knife collection and they're really into it. And they're part of the community, and they happen to post pictures that are kind of pirate themed, but you talk to them and they're not an actual pirate. So it's not a big deal. They like that. And I don't know, there's also guys who are really into like Norse mythology and Viking stuff. And there's people who are into things that aren't just knives that I find to kind of have flowed into the hobby for some people.
Yeah.
But I don't have a problem with it. I think the more the merrier. And that's one of those examples where like the rate at which those people were brought in by Peter McKinnon was, it maybe had some like weird effects right at the beginning, but they've actually pretty seamlessly integrated in at this point.
Yeah, I think it definitely worked out. And I mean, I only know McKinnon because I was also trying to learn photography stuff, and he does a lot of tutorials specific to photography on YouTube and videography. But it's been a really interesting thing to watch. And it can only be good. Like we said, just growing the community in that way. But they definitely all have their own unique aesthetic, which personally I'm not into the whole kind of dark and moody, like super red toned whiskey glasses and dice and all that stuff.
Right.
I think a lot of the initial hesitation was because of the gear and because it didn't seem like these people necessarily valued the same things that the core knife community people kind of value, like quality materials for use or getting deep into, metallurgy and steels and geometry. It was just kind of like, I don't know, it was a different type of thing, it felt like initially. But like you said, a lot of them have kind of gotten deeper into it and collecting more and more knives, kind of expanding their knowledge of what people kind of value within a knife. So I think it's come down a little bit to now where we've reached another kind of plateau where I think they've sifted it out and everything's kind of okay.
Yeah. I think the point you made where like the gateway for them was, it seemed like the knife that they were putting in their picture was a method by which to reach an audience that they weren't reaching before, like from a social media standpoint. It was like, now I can use these hashtags because I put this CRKT in it, and now there's this audience of the knife community that I can be making pictures for. And so I think, at the beginning that seemed a little bit like, but are you even into knives, or is this just like a subject for the sake of shooting? But now they're like, a lot of them are really into knives, and even if they are just barely into knives, that's okay too. Like I want more people to want to have knives in their pockets, whether it's to take pictures of or otherwise. I think more people should carry a knife as a tool. So I'm for it.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say about it, so like back when I was getting into design and thinking about whether I want to design something, something that was kind of always top of mind for me was how small this weird like world of knives is. It's a pretty small community when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not so difficult compared to other industries to do something or to work really hard at something and to stand out as much as you can with knives, I think. If you think of someone like Vero, who came in and in a very short amount of time, pretty much everybody knows who he is at this point. That kind of has a value of its own. So when you see professional photographers realize that, okay, here's this space where, not to be mean, but a lot of people aren't necessarily the best photographers, how easy it would be to gain clout in this community by posting a knife, very well processed image on Instagram, and then quickly gain this following because it's something that other people have not really been able to do previously. And that feels good, being able, everybody's telling you how cool you are and how cool these pictures are and everything, and you're only kind of having the same knife related values that they do. You're just kind of doing it. So I think there was some of that, and I think the ones that really meant it kind of have stuck around and gone deeper into it, and you can kind of tell who those people are. But I think that's just people. I think people are right to be a little cautious about people doing that. And then the ones that are, that mean well, I think will prove it over time.
Yeah, I think it's that's well said. I also find it interesting that, like, for Peter McKinnon specifically, again, no hard feelings toward the guy. I don't want to make him or his fans mad. I respect him objectively. The fact that he's been able to create a brand within the community as well, where he sells products that oftentimes are very different from knives themselves, but the knife community has in a large way latched onto. I do see a lot of pushback for certain of his products. But in general, like the way he's been able to craft a market within the community. And I think a lot of that is people that he helped to bring into it. So like, more power to him that he was able to get these people enthusiastic about a community that he saw an opportunity to help grow. He helped it grow, and now they're here. And now he's got this product line of pirate themed knickknacks that do really well. And like, maybe seems harsh to call them knickknacks, but I think that's a more kind term than a lot of people would use about like a gold-plated screw that holds your like light switch plaque on. Like those are different products to be selling to this type of community. And I think it's pretty inarguable that like this community is who those products are marketed towards, and he sells out and they do really well. So genuinely nothing against him, but I find it interesting that there's that market now too for those things. And different products I think have also come and gone, where like there was a time where a lot of knife guys were genuinely buying like really nice fidget spinners when fidget spinners were hot. And I had like a 7-Eleven cheap fidget spinner because I thought it was funny, and I got it like partly for my daughter, partly for me to play with. But like the fact that these interesting different products come and go, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing either. I think it keeps things kind of fun and different, and there's trends and fads just like in any other segment.
Yeah, it's always kind of cool seeing new products. And I mean, ultimately it's quality stuff that he's making, like the coins, everything, the dice, like these are very well-made stuff. And it's cool to see people appreciate any kind of craftsmanship like that. I did also have a fidget spinner, but kind of on brand for me. The only one I got was the one designed by Snex. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
I don't know if I've seen his fidget spinner. I've got a mini buster right now in for review, the Wii built one. So I've seen his knives, and I have the Wii production version of one of his knives in hand. But
yeah, well, on brand for him, it was a ridiculous design that you could disassemble by hand with like all these crazy springs and things. Just cool as an object, basically. But you definitely have a big dedication within the knife community to the functional part of functional art. And when people see things that are like coins or other trinkets that don't have an obvious functional purpose, I think there's some resistance to that.
Yeah.
Having said that, people also have been buying steel flame stuff for I don't know how long. So there's always, people want different things, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's one that I understand even less than the dice and coins. I'm the type of person, though, who if somebody wants to spend their money on something and they're going to enjoy it for whatever reason, whether it's utility or otherwise, that's fine. But there isn't a single steel flame thing, whether it's a pocket clip for a knife or a ring or a medallion. None of that speaks to me in any way that will ever get me to fork over $1 for it. But there's a lot of things in the world that I don't have any interest in that other people are overly interested in. So
yeah,
that's what it is.
If you can create a market for it, then go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of products like that outside of the realm of knives. And I think honestly within the knife community, they tend to be kind of the exception. Like when something really weird and like unfunctional comes out, I feel like I always get like messages about it. People are like, did you see this thing? Like this guy's selling a candle for $100. Can you believe it? Like, and it's like, if people will buy it, cool. But like, it's not all that common. And I think it does tend to kind of come and go in waves. But most of the stuff, even you could argue, like has quite a bit of utility, like pry bars and bottle openers and even knucks and stuff. Like people have collections of that type of stuff, and it doesn't generally interest me all that much. Although I do like having like my Vero pry bar, which is a pocket tool as well. It's kind of a multi-tool. Like that one's really nice. I like that. But yeah, like the people who will spend several $100s on a knuck that's a bottle opener, and not for me, but cool. Like it at least serves a function. Like it will open bottles, and you could punch things with it. Sure.
More power to them. When it comes to me, like I said, I generally want as least amount of things on my person as possible. Mm-hmm. I don't like having tons of stuff stuffed in my pockets. So if I can limit it to just a few things that are going to be really useful and practical for me to carry, then that's what I'm trying to do, basically, is just find like the best of each thing. Like what's the best wallet I can find? What's the best knife or flashlight? Those are the things I kind of want to stick with, and not, I don't dive too much into all of those ancillary stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, usually if I do, I find it's just because I've gotten curious enough by seeing enough people get into it that I'm like,
Yeah.
what's the hubbub? Like, why does everybody want to carry a pry bar? Because these aren't all tradesmen who are like opening cans of paint all the time. It's like, what's the use for it? And then sometimes I'll try it and I'll find, yeah, it actually was kind of useful. Other times I'll chuckle and say, I didn't find it that useful. But uh, yeah, the exploration aspect of it can be a little fun.
I think so. Yeah, that's part of that's what we're doing here, right?
Yeah.
We're trying new stuff. I mean, even as I'm designing things, I'm not an engineer or a super creative scientist person. Like, I can't create new design features with everything. It's kind of just, I want to design stuff that's different or specific to my aesthetic preferences. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to function better than some other knife, but I still want to make it because I think it looks cool, and I feel like maybe other people would want it just because it does look different. So I can understand the desire to just create more things that aren't necessarily any better or worse than anything else. It's just more variety, right? It's more stuff to choose from and appreciate.
Yeah, I think it shows the robustness of the market too, that a lot of those products can do really well. The fact that there's not like an agreed upon pry bar out there, but there are like several really popular options
Yeah.
is like, it's kind of cool that there's a market that supports those things. And it seems to be the same market that's buying the knives and also that's buying the
I mean,
knives.
I would think it correlates to some degree with how good a company's branding is.
Mm.
Most of the people I see coming out with those kind of ancillary items or pry bars and things, they have built up a brand around a certain aesthetic or a certain core value, and the people that buy into that, they kind of tend to just buy and carry all of that stuff or really support that maker or that brand, which is really cool. But then you find other makers who are like, if it's somebody new, like myself, who's a new designer or a new custom maker or something, then there's really not a lot of trust for what they're making. They kind of just take the item that they made and they have to force that to stand up against itself. Like, is this worth anything regardless of who made it or what it is? So most of the other tertiary things, I feel like, are people buying from established brands and they just want to support and they want more stuff from that person. And it's like a cool ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because I wonder if you were able, I don't think it's possible, but if you were able to like blindfold somebody basically and have them decide without knowing who the maker was, whether they like or dislike a product. Some products seem very easy to tell who made it because their philosophy and design language runs throughout and all that. But if you were to look at one of their pieces on like an objective, like how does this piece rank? If I could remove every bit of preconceived, like this maker's really good before I ever touch it, like would it still be as good? Yeah, I wonder what that would look like for some of the most popular products, because that's also been an interesting thing as a reviewer, like getting some pieces that are seemingly agreed upon as being phenomenal, like some of the best. And I'm not even trying to say like I don't want to open the Sebenza can of worms at the moment, but like the Benchmade 940 is a good example of a knife that so many people for so long have told me is like their favorite EDC knife. And it's like, and then I got one and I didn't really love it. And I think a lot of people get that knife, and because they've been told the story so many times of how good it is, they love it. And so if people have been told the story of how great a maker is and how cool his whole product line is, and then they get one of his products, then it's like, I have to like this because I already know that I like everything about it. So this has to be good. I wonder how much that plays a role in the perception of actual quality once the product is real and in your hand.
Yeah, it's hard to separate. I don't think that it's a bad thing per se either, that there are people that want to buy more stuff from a maker that they like. But it kind of goes back to that. If you were to take some pry bars or something and hand them to non-knife people, I mean, they're going to be like, what do I do with this? What is this?
Right.
So I don't know. There's not really any rule to it or anything. It's just an observation, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those things too where like I'm trying to remember what made me first think of it. I think it was when I was going over pry bars, when I was doing a carry challenge with the Lynch pry bar. I had an all access pass loaner, and I was trying to think about how many people in my life that I know well and see often and care about, like people who are close friends or family, who never put a knife in their pocket ever. And they still open boxes, and they still open their letters, and they still cut tags off of their clothing, and they survive every day. Not even a close call. A lot of them are living well, you know? And it's like, I think we tell ourselves this story where we're constantly like justifying things. And I have to catch myself even doing it with the knives themselves when I start to like, there's zero utility in carrying that coin, you know, like, I judge you because you're carrying a coin. I have to watch out because I would argue vehemently that a knife is a worthy tool to carry with you everywhere. But I have to remember that there are plenty of people who never do get by just fine. And so the idea that I'm like judging somebody else for carrying something that I don't see as worth it is like, I probably don't have I'm not on such a high horse, you know?
Yeah. I think it's it could be a slippery slope. You have, I think you mentioned it maybe in a prior podcast about turning kind of flaws into features of a design. You kind of, I mean, as enthusiasts, we find a knife and we try to justify it or think about certain design features and how we might potentially use those things or how they might be a good thing. And that's why we should buy it or keep it. So you don't want to go too far down that road for sure. But I also don't want to judge anybody who's just collecting things that they like, right?
Right. And sometimes you can pick something apart too much and start finding flaws out of features, you know, like where I think some people look at things too critically. And that's, as a reviewer, something I have to be careful of too, is like, am I determined to not like something just as much as I might be determined to like something? Like the one Medford knife I've ever reviewed, I slammed because I thought it was horrible. But if I review another Medford knife, I really want to be delicate and take care to make sure that I don't go into it determined for it to be bad and make it a self-fulfilling prophecy, you know? And like, the other day I was joking with my buddy Kevin, Lefty EDC, who he seemingly always gets the lemon in every batch of knives. And he always has this problem, and he's constantly like having to send knives out for warranty. And it's like legitimate things. He's not making these things up. And so I was joking with him that like, maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that you seem to like put out always, that you're the one who gets the lemons. And then some of them you're getting and you're like finding a way for it to be wrong because you're looking for everything to have something that's wrong with it. Whereas some of those flaws are so small that to me, who's not necessarily looking for it to be there, I might never even find it. Or maybe, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, how do you protect yourself from that? And I don't think you really can. I think you can just kind of manage it of like, what's my expectation of this thing coming in? Is it automatically good? Is it automatically bad? How do I remove some of that to see it for what it is? And there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, for sure. I want to say it's Nick Shabazz who talks about that a little bit, and like how it's basically impossible to be truly objective in a review. You're always going to have these preconceived notions or confirmation bias when you're going into something, especially if it's something that was provided to you for free by a maker, which is often the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the best rule is just to be as transparent as possible about your likes and dislikes, just where you're coming from on something, so people can kind of take it with a grain of salt and put it relative to what they know about you as a person. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's possible to completely separate those things, your opinion about something versus just what it is.
Right.
But most reviewers do a pretty good job about being upfront about that. So
right.
As long as you're
interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Just as long as you're going around to different reviewers, you can generally collate enough data to get a full picture, of what something is going to be like.
Yep. Yeah. You watch 10 reviews on one knife. There's going to be a lot of overlap, but there'll also be some things that one person said that no one else did.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like the idea of trying to make a perfect review or a perfect test, because my mind immediately went to like medical trials with like medications and stuff. They'll do like double blind with placebos, and sometimes the placebo will have a crazy effectiveness rate. So like even when you remove all of people's like ability to sense where something came from and whether it's real or not, like sometimes people still play crazy tricks on their own minds. And it's like, yeah, I think the human condition is kind of what's flawed there, in the way that we can't detach ourselves from things, which is also a strength in many other ways, where we're emotional beings, and that attachment is good in a familial unit and all these things. But it's like it can be harmful, and we can kind of set up blockades for ourselves and seeing certain situations with clarity,
Yeah, I've definitely become, I don't know, what is this, like 3-4 years into the hobby, a little more jaded when it comes to knife reviews. I can't just like sit and watch reviews all day at this point. I watch a lot of reviews, and I consume a lot of content as just somebody who's in the hobby, for sure. But I think the classical idea or review of a tabletop review of a knife is generally not necessarily the content that everybody's craving, per se. It's more interesting to watch somebody talk about a knife and why they personally like the knife than like list off the specs and all this stuff that you can generally get from articles online or a web page, basically.
Yeah.
That's why I like your reviews, for sure, because you're intentionally subjective about it, how you use it. You use your knives in the way that it fits into your life, which, if that fits in with how somebody else is also living their life, then that's way more useful than just a list of specs, right?
Right.
So
hopefully.
Yeah. So as long as there's a good diversity of people that are doing subjective reviews like that, I feel like that's a way more interesting content, for one, and then just more beneficial from a purchaser's standpoint on gaining unique information about a product.
Yeah.
So
it's
hopefully more
interesting.
people do that.
I think there's a balance there for sure, where like I'm really grateful that there are people who are doing the tabletop specs heavy stuff, because I know there are people who want it and I'm unwilling to give it to them. Like I wouldn't have any fun making those kinds of videos. But like the other day, in one of the group chats that I'm in, there was somebody who was looking into skiff knives. They were talking about the Accomplice and the Drifter and like what are the differences between them. And they were asking me, because I've handled both. I've handled yours and I've handled Alex's. Yours is the Accomplice, right?
It's the culprit. The Accomplice is basically a bigger culprit. Yeah.
Okay. I don't remember. So yours is about the same size as Alex's, though, right?
I think so. It's about like a 3.5 inch. Yeah.
Okay.
It's somewhere between 3.25 and 3.5.
Gotcha. So yeah, or the other day, this buddy's asking about them, and he's like, "How big are they?" And I'm like, "I'm not the right guy to ask that to, frankly." Even though I've held them, I was like, "I bet it's listed on Skiff site." And then he goes on Skiff site, couldn't find it. So I'm like, "What? It's not there." So I go on Skiff site, and I couldn't find it. And I was like, "Interesting, it's not listed on their site." So I go and I see Eugene Kwan has a video talking about the knife on YouTube, and I watch it for a couple of minutes, and I kind of scrub to where I can see he's talking about specs, and then boom, I figure out the blade length because it's on that YouTube video. And his isn't even tabletop, it's like dashboard top, but he's one of those that's like more like we're going to compare it directly with a couple of other knives, we're going to talk about the specs, and he does weave in a lot of his own experience as well, and talks about how he feels about it. But it's a different video than mine is. And if I had the same video on or a video of the same knife, I would not have said the blade length. I'd have said, I bet this is somewhere between 3.25 and 3.5 based on me putting it up to my palm and how big it seems. But like, that's not a piece of information I even really care about once I have a knife. But when I'm researching it, I like for it to be there. So if it's by rare chance not easily accessible online on this random custom knife that you don't see listings for on Blade HQ to check against, like, it's great that YouTubers do that, and I appreciate that they do that. I just don't want to have to be that guy, so I'm glad that they do.
Yeah, definitely. And even like I'm super grateful for Nick Shabazz disassembling every knife that he gets.
Yep.
It's a ridiculous thing to do as a knife owner, but
It's come in handy a lot for me.
yeah, just being able to go to one of his videos and just pop over, scrub to the point where like, okay, this is what it looks like open. This is where the stop pin is. This is kind of how everything's assembled. You can learn pretty much everything you need to learn about how design works and how, pivot assemblies operate just by looking at stuff like that. So there's always going to be a need for those types of videos for sure.
Yeah. And if you're that knife company too, like I've worked for pretty small companies before, where there's just a handful of employees doing multiple things. The idea of like putting a product to market, if they needed to have someone in-house be making a video illustrating how to disassemble and reassemble a knife and maintain it properly, like a lot of companies are not going to make that content because they're intimidated by it. B, they don't have somebody who wants to do it. And like, C, they just don't have the time because there's so many things on their plate. So for somebody like Nick Shabazz to be doing that for a huge library of knives at this point has got to be super helpful too for those knife companies, because it's content that, like, if somebody's wondering how to take apart their knife, it's one less customer service inquiry that they get where someone's like, I've got my knife apart, how do I get it back together? And they're sitting there on the phone with them trying to like, just watch Nick Shabazz's video. That'll help.
Yeah.
So I think it's cool.
Who knows how many stripped screws and like service calls he's also responsible for, but let's assume that there's a net good involved in that situation.
Yeah. I'm inclined to think that it's probably more helpful than unhelpful, but there's definitely got to be some people who were taking their knives apart because they saw him do it and aren't as familiar with the process as he is, and have definitely jacked some stuff up. That's bound to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I think I told you about this. I have owned this knife. I think it was like over a year before I even needed to take it apart. And that was only because the Loctite that they put in it had finally loosened up, that I needed to like tighten down these little pivot discs. Mm-hmm. So I have not really had a knife long enough to where I felt like I actually needed to disassemble it. Most knives you can wash out pretty easily and just basically blow it out with some air and fix most problems. So just when it comes to maintenance like that, I think could be a bit extreme. But
yeah, most of my disassemblies have always been because I'm modifying something. Like if I'm swapping scales, or then like, that Spyderco is coming apart because it's getting new parts put onto it. But yeah, it's very, very rare for me to need to do anything other than adjust a pivot on a knife. And I think a lot of the problems that happen with a lot of people's knives come from during their disassembly and reassembly process. Like that's when things can go wrong more so than just maintaining your knife as it's put together and continuing to use it, because things are more fragile when they're apart, not being all held together. It's
that's when people lose screws and scratch things up, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a video that got posted in the Millie Club, I think it was last night, somebody who had just gotten the new Warncliffe PM2, the Cutlery Shop exclusive. Right. And I was unaware that this YouTuber existed, but apparently he has like over 4,000 subscribers. His library goes back like 11 years of like mostly knife content, a lot of cold steel stuff. Anyways, it was a guy who was moving the factory clip from tip up, the way they ship it, from tip down to tip up. And one of the screws stripped, I guess. And he was like roasting him. He's like, Spyderco warranty, better take care of this kind of thing. And it was a laughing stock in the Millie Club because everybody's like, this is over a pocket clip screw. Like, calm down, bro. But yeah, it's just funny because like he stripped a screw, because he was moving the clip, which everyone moves the clip. No one wants that knife to be tipped. Yeah. Very, very few people do, I should say. So like not super his fault. But again, it's like, a lot of the things that go wrong with a knife are when you've got it apart, you're putting it back together, and you lose a part, you break a little part, stuff like that.
It happens. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So with your current collection, I know you've got the skiff, you've got the rake, you've got a couple of GECs. What kind of other knives occupy your collection, and how big do you keep it?
I mean, generally not that big, especially now. I feel like this is a special circumstance where I'm currently in the process of buying a house, so I'm liquidating some things and kind of saving up a fairly good amount just to help pay for that down payment. But generally speaking, especially if I'm going to knife shows, then I'll have certain funds basically set aside to kind of buy something that I might be interested in or something different that I haven't tried before. Like the Spyderco Stretch that I'm waiting for on pre-order still is actually my first Spyderco, which seems kind of ridiculous when I think about it. I feel like because I jumped so many tiers, I never really got to experience a lot of this mid-range stuff that is very quality, right? Quality knives. But that's why I think right now I find myself going back down through. I've kind of experienced what customs are generally like. So as much as I want to buy all of these kind of mid-tier knives, I'm still also limited by the fact that I don't really love having a big collection. I'm not really like a collector of things. And if I have a thing and I'm not using it, it doesn't tend to stick around really. Especially something as expensive as like a custom knife where I could turn that into something that I would use, like a new lens for my camera or something truly functional instead of just sitting in a drawer and like kind of flick it around for a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, even like this rake, I'm appreciating it. It kind of gave me a little fix for a bit, and I'm probably going to end up giving that away in a little bit. But I'm trying things out to see, I'm always pursuing if there's something that is different or something that works better than what I have now. I'm never going to assume that like what I have is the end all be all of knives. So there's always something new to experience, but it's kind of a rotating door for me. Things tend to come and then go, and then they kind of lead the way to purchase other stuff.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think when I loan you my Arius, I also need to loan you a PM2, because if the Stretch is going to be your first Spyderco, which I know you've told me before, I don't know, I need to make sure that you spend a little bit with a PM2 in your pocket, because now I'm really curious how you would feel about that as a knife, because it's one for me that like, if I had to, like, for a monetary reason, like things got crazy in my life for some reason, I need to sell my whole collection and I need to like get as much money out of it as I can. The knife that I'd reasonably keep, I think, like gun to my head, if I could just have one kind of responsible knife to keep, would be like my CPM 10V PM2, because for me, it's a knife that just works and it cuts well. I like the geometry. I like how precise the tip is. There's a lot that I like about it. I enjoy carrying it. I enjoy fidgeting with it. It's kind of like almost a jack of all trades, but I think it excels in certain things too. And so it's like, I think I need to make you experience one since you haven't carried one yet.
I feel like I should say I've experienced, we could say, a lot of knives, and I've tried a lot of knives. I've handled a lot of knives, hanging out with knife people and knife shops and knife shows, and having handled a lot of Spydercos. There's no doubt that they are really well-made functional tools. I don't think anybody would say that a Spyderco doesn't work well, right? Unless you're talking about the Pochi or something, maybe. But generally, it's in the name, right? They make high-performance tools, and I love that that's their focus. But they do make a lot of odd ducks, man. A lot of those knives end up looking kind of weird, and which isn't a good way. They don't necessarily do the same thing that everyone else is doing with regard to aesthetics and lines and curves. They have a different objective in mind, which is admirable. But I feel like I've just been so aesthetic focused in my collecting that none has really stood out to me as like a thing that I would want on my person to appreciate for any extended period of time.
Well, if it's mine and you're borrowing it, then there's no, I wouldn't even be offended if you said you hated it. I'd just be curious to see what you think after like a couple of days of it in pocket.
I mean, I'm more curious to know how it compares to the Stretch, I guess, based on what I know about them. I mean, the Stretch is going to be in like FRN scales, so it's probably going to be lighter. It's got thinner blade stock than a PM2, so I think it's got better edge geometry for what I would want to use it for. K390 could not have a problem with that steel. So I don't know that I would appreciate it any more than the Stretch, but
which is fair. Yeah. See, for me, I've handled a Stretch, and I don't like backlocks, and I don't like FRN. So for me, it's like if they made a Stretch with a compression lock, still in K390, and with G10 instead of FRN, or
Yeah.
something, a carbon or micarta, something else lightweight would be cool. Then I would probably love the Stretch because the blade is fantastic and the
Yeah.
handle feels good, like profile wise, but I don't like feeling like I'm holding on to plastic, and I don't like backlocks. So
Yeah, those are all fair.
maybe, yeah, but no strings attached. While you have the Stretch, I think it would be interesting to see your comparison. But we
Yeah,
look for different
definitely.
things, which is fair too. Because like to me, the compression lock is one of my favorite things about the PM2 because I love like the way that it fidgets. And as I've gotten used to it, like it's a lock that I trust and I enjoy deploying and closing. And it's like this knife is up my alley, but I don't expect it to be up everybody else's. So I'd just be curious because I don't know many other people who are as deep into knives as you are who haven't experienced a PM2. It might be like when I came to the 940 way too late in collecting, where I'd already like learned so many other things.
Yeah.
When I got a 940 and the story I'd been told about it for so long was like, it's the ultimate EDC. And then I was like, but I like this, all better for it. And they cost less and have better materials. And like that, to me, it was outclassed, but it's like super old and like a time tested design. And that's part of why some people love it. So I looked at it differently, but you will too on the PM2 because you're coming at it from a different place than I did when I tried it the first time, you know?
Yeah, no, that would definitely be, it would be interesting. I mean, of the PM2s I've handled, I feel like as much as I like how fidgetable the compression lock is, it tends to sit weird if I'm doing like a strenuous kind of hammer grip or trying to bear through something. The little tab and like the recessed area is a weird, ergonomically, it's different than you get sensation-wise from a frame lock, right?
Mm-hmm.
But definitely I've not had one for, extended period of time. So I think it'd be interesting.
We'll make it happen. Oh, maybe I'll loan you the Project Maximet one I done that I did because it's really lightweight. It's got the like forged carbon scales on it.
Yeah.
And
okay. Yeah, that would be maybe a fair comparison to something like the lightweight Stretch.
Could be.
I don't know. I'm just kind of, like I said, I'm really picky when it comes to aesthetics. It's not, there's so many knives that work really well as knives. So how do you decide which ones to carry? It's just got to be the one that you like having the most, right? So
for sure. Yeah, I think so the last time we went hiking, for those of you listening, it was pretty fun. We went on a hike and I took Nick up to my favorite kind of waterfall spot, and it happened to be raining that day, which made it more fun. We built character. And then afterwards I took him to get mate because a day with me and not getting mate seems weird. And then we went and we got chicken from a Peruvian place and we ate it, and we talked knives the entire time, but we were sitting in the trunk of my car eating Peruvian roasted chicken, which was really good. And I feel like that's when this came up, but we were talking about how in today's knife market, the buyer has the ability to get something that looks fantastic, functions really well as a tool, and is fun, and has top tier materials. Like you can get all of those things right now, and not even necessarily by going like crazy price points. Like for a couple $100, you can probably get something that you think, obviously looks are subjective, but that you think looks amazing and inarguably is ground well, made out of good materials, has good ergos, and like is a good knife. And so I think it's interesting, like the PM2, one of your things about it is you don't like the way it looks, which is totally fair. I hated the way the PM2 looked and the Para 3 and most Spydercos until I like started getting into them, and I feel like I kind of acquired a taste for it over time. But I wouldn't say this is an objectively pretty knife, not even close. I wouldn't even try to argue that. But like you can get knives that are all of those things. And so you're right. Why should you have to like make a concession on getting a knife that you don't like the looks of when it might be all of the other boxes are checked, but you could get one that does check every single one, including looks. Like, why am I making sacrifices?
There's way too many choices right now, which, that's obviously a good thing. People get to really drill down into what it is they want in a knife. But there's some paralysis involved with that too sometimes.
Yeah.
And I don't know, aesthetics are a weird thing. because even with the skiff culprit, I don't know how many people I run into that are like, they love the drifter and they think that basically this kind of trapper-esque blade style is just a weird looking thing. And then when it comes to me, I'm like, this is like the perfect drop point that I could ever imagine. So I don't know. People want different things in aesthetics, which is cool. I think that's why I want to design knives that have my specific aesthetic. If I thought all these things already existed, I wouldn't do it. But I think that's part of what makes it fun.
Yeah. And there are knives that I objectively really dislike that other people love, that I kind of celebrate that happens. Like when a Medford fanboy jumps in my comment section of the review I did of a 187 DP 6+ months ago and is mad right now that I said negative things about the knife that they love and swear by, like, I'm not even mad about it. I might think it's hilarious if I'm being honest, but like, it's kind of a great thing that there's a Medford guy out there with a steel flame ring on who like wants different things than I do, because it creates more variety. And I think if all of the products that came out seemed like they were perfectly catered to me, then the knife community would be a way smaller place. And that's, again, not a thing that I want. Like, I want there to be more people who are into it, regardless of whether they agree with my preferences.
Yeah, it's generally a good thing. You run into some weird cases where people like, I think it happens more with production companies, lower end production companies like CRKT or other within that kind of tier, and they're manufacturing knives, and you just like kind of wonder like who is actually buying these things, or what makes you think that we as a community would want this product. And then what you don't realize is that behind the scenes, when they're doing their books and their business, like obviously they're staying in business and they're selling all these knives to people that just aren't like you. So sometimes it's a weird, frustrating thing, I guess, because you kind of wish that people would make the knives that you want, and then you may not always realize what's going on behind the scenes. I feel like a lot of that is also what happens with like CRK, and how people are wishing that they would make certain changes to their designs, and they may not understand everything that goes on with them running their business, and why they make the decisions that they make. That's kind of one thing you learn, I think, as you get into design more too. There's a lot of decisions you don't really understand why knife companies would make until you have to do those things yourself. Mm-hmm. I've kind of been privileged somewhat. I get to talk to like Elliot from Fair and Forge a bit about it, and he does a lot of OEM work and licensing work at this point. They don't do as much customs through their shop, but it's really interesting when you can talk to knife makers like that and get a sense of the business side of it, because it is very different than just designing stuff, I guess, that you think looks cool. Sometimes people are just designing things that are going to sell for different reasons.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, Walmart sells a lot of knives. They don't sell any knives that I want, but like, I'd rather have those people have a knife in their pocket that could maybe end up getting them to a place where like they appreciate it more. They're looking for that next thing. And then they do stumble into, I think a lot of guys, that's kind of their story. It's like a lot of dudes who are into Spydercos started with a Tenacious that they got somewhere like a Walmart or a gun store or whatever it is. Yeah. And it's like, if that's the gateway that kind of eventually gets them here, then that's great. And like, there's a reason why the Transformers franchise kills it. Like that's like a mass market thing, right? And so I think, yeah, I can't really be mad at Gerber or CRKT or Kershaw for making those offerings that for sure they sell a ton of. Like, maybe that's also what allows them to have some offerings that ultimately are better. Like if Kershaw didn't sell all those knives low end, could they have ZT? Do I want to change what ZT's doing right at the moment too? Yes, but like ZT in general, I think is really like, I'm glad that exists within Kershaw and that they've got that line of knives. And yeah, I think it's worth it for some of those brands to do the things that us enthusiasts aren't after, because ultimately it kind of comes full circle and allows it to keep going.
Yeah, it's definitely a big machine. I went to visit my dad last Thanksgiving. And like I said, he's big into guns and he does hunting of like deer on his property and everything. And it still kind of pains me to see like this cheap Kershaw in his pocket that he uses for everything. But like it's a lightweight, it's a tool that he's not afraid to like scrape up and use on things. And apparently that's the market for those things, is it's
Yeah.
a cheap disposable kind of blade for people that actually use their knives probably more than a lot of other people. So it's an interesting thing. I don't know. Some people stop there and that's all the knife that they need. I think that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's reasonable for anybody to get to a point where like they're okay stopping at a certain limit. Like if somebody, even if they appreciate and admire knives that are like really expensive, if for them the most they're willing to spend on a knife is $100 or $150 or
Yeah.
whatever, because like to them that's what's reasonable, then like cool. Like I, there's a reason why models exist in that range and that they're available and there's good stuff to be had there. I'm a big believer in like either doing the research or like trying things out to figure out what's really good in that range before you just pick something that's a $50 knife because it was $50. But yeah, I don't know. It's funny too how like with some people it really clicks when they get one knife and then they want more and more and more and more and they want to like keep discovering. Like my brother-in-law, Christmas time, was asking me what knife he should get, and he's never, I don't think, carried a pocket knife. I like when I started dating my wife that first Christmas in like 2011, I gave him and my father-in-law and my other brother-in-law, at that point they weren't family yet, but my wife's family, I gave them all like I got a big five on like Black Friday weekend. They had like the HK knives for sale back when they were
Okay.
built by Benchmade. I think I got them each a like HK knife. Um, and I don't think any of them ever carried it. I think it's probably in a drawer somewhere at each of their houses. But all of a sudden, my brother-in-law's like, because he knows I'm doing the channel, and his stepson really likes watching the channel, and is like always like, "Oh, Jake's got a cool new knife." So my brother-in-law is like, "What should I get?" And I was like, well, "What's your budget? What do you want to do with it?" And he's like, "I probably want to spend like definitely less than $100 and get one that's like I decent, like that I can do some work with, but I want it to be like fun to play with." And I was like, "Great, get a Civivi." And he's like,
Hmm.
"Which one?" And I was like, "Pick one from their lineup that you think looks cool, and they're all gonna have a fun action, and they're all gonna like be decent. And
Yeah.
so then he gets one, and then he gets another one, gets one for his stepson, and he's like got all these, like he's got three of them now, right, in his household. And then now the next time he sees me, he's like, "Oh, what should I get next? Like, what's really good for like $150?" And it's like, cool, like it bit him a little bit. But other people, you give them a knife or they buy their own one knife, and like it just stops there, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that difference is per se. Like I don't know if there's a marker for that.
I know, it almost seems like there's some kind of gene for it, right? It's a weird thing. And like, believe me, I I give knives away to pretty much everybody in close proximity to me at some point, just
Yeah.
to try and like create enthusiasts within my life. It is yet to really take with anybody. So it is a weird thing that like doesn't seem to happen organically in face-to-face life, right? We just kind of find each other online in this weird way.
Right. Yeah, it's like this weird underground cult that we're in.
Yeah,
We
it
need a
is.
secret handshake.
It's pretty strange.
Yeah, I think we're probably all mutants. Like we have a specific gene that's mutated. We just need our Professor X.
So I think it's Loveless has a really good quote that I like about knives, and I forget exactly what it is, but it's something just like when you pick up a knife, it's kind of you have this atavistic experience where just like something within you basically understands that this is like a really important, useful thing, and
Mhm.
that for however many generations that mankind has used knives since the beginning of time, like this thing has kept us alive, and we know that it's important to have one, and it's kind of set evolutionary, like in our brain, that you should have this thing. And I think for some people, they just pick up a knife and they immediately have that feeling, and then other
Yeah.
people just don't really get it, and that's just kind of been my experience. So,
Yeah,
like I
I
said,
can see that.
my first knife at 14, having no real previous history with knives, I still immediately was like, oh, this is like, for some reason, I need this thing.
Behold. Yeah. No, I get it. I think I relate to that because I can remember even being a little kid who's like dad and older brothers were into knives, like maybe that played some part of it, but the connection that I had early on with like just being able to like have my dad let me use his knife real quick,
Yeah.
or like my first Swiss Army knife that he gave me, the sense of like responsibility and like this is a real knife, like this is actually sharp. This has to be taken seriously or it can hurt you. Like there's a like I don't know if it's a reverence for it or what, but it's like for me, I just like understood it, like it clicked,
Yeah.
what a knife can do. And I don't know. I think I wonder also if like historically, as societies have changed and gotten arguably further and further away from like trades and like working in the field and like doing like real physical labor that would require more reasonably the use of an edged tool as often. I wonder if like some of it has like kind of left the population because natural selection or whatever, you don't need it as much anymore, or if it's still like baked into people and there's just less exposure to it. Because if you worked on a farm 100 years ago, like you would need to have a knife on you a lot of the time. It wouldn't really be a choice of like, am I into carrying knives or not? It's like part of the tool like setup that you have. So I wonder if because it's less common to need it, if there's less people who find themselves wanting it, or if it's just like it comes up less. I wonder what that would be.
I think so. It's like I said, of the people that I've given knives to, generally they don't seem to have the same reaction for whatever reason. So I mean, most people they're going to see the utility in a knife. Obviously, everybody uses kitchen knives. They're cooking food every day, and they see the utility in having a sharp tool with them. But yeah, it just seems like for some reason it's not exactly in the same way. So maybe that's what's keeping the knife community as small as it is. It's like a weird, unique genomic trigger within people that are like-minded, and they just seem to mesh well. But it's kind of an interesting hobby in that way, but it's not all-inclusive, I guess.
Yeah. I think it does play in a little bit to, I think on our hike, we talked about how both you and I on the Enneagram test are 5s.
Yeah.
And how when I've asked a number of people, like even just guests on this podcast, it hasn't come up on all of them, but MB Wild is a 5. Wes Newman from the Pocket Perspective is a 5. They're both guys who like I've asked about it and they were, I don't know if I've asked anybody else. I need to start like when I invite someone on the podcast, like send them a link to the test first, just because I'm curious. I'm not like trying to get into astrology, and that's not what the Enneagram test is, but like I'd be curious to know within somewhat of a sample size in the EDC community, how many people are like have that personality type. And if not like that one, are there like a couple other few that are really common and some that are super uncommon? Because there's got to be a reason why like a lot of my best friends in the community happen to test the same way on that test, you included. And why like I don't know, the way that I can bounce ideas off of you and hear your ideas like makes sense in my head more than other people. And we're both really into knives. Like, is that a coincidence or is that, I don't know.
Yeah, weird how those things are correlated. We probably need some kind of like Enneagram group chat thing going on, but it would be interesting to know, how that is distributed, I guess, within like the broader knife community. I feel like most people in this hobby are more analytically minded, and they like nitpicking things and digging into details of things like that. So there's a good chance we'd all probably be in a similar cluster of types.
Yeah. Now I'm curious. I'm going to start asking more and more people. I'm not going to make it a hard requirement to be on my podcast, but I'm going to ask people politely before they come on. If you've got time, take this test, and then if it comes up, great. If not, then it's just cool for me to know. Because it's interesting.
Yeah, and shout out to Wes too. The Pocket Perspective, I had not known about his channel really
Mhm.
until I think you had him on your podcast, but super interesting guy, super well produced YouTube channel. And like, it's got to be like the most in-depth reviews that I've seen in a long time, if ever. Like, he does live Rockwell testing and like,
Yep.
it's insane. So, and
That
he
dude
came out
makes
with,
me feel really dumb every time I talk to him.
yeah, no, super cool channel. Yeah.
Yeah, so he helped me with the design, making it 3D on the knife that I'm working on.
Hmm,
He's brilliant at CAD, like
nice.
really the like the Zoom calls we would have where he'd be just working on it. It's like genuinely impressive. And yeah, I don't know. He's one of those guys who like I keep finding this is back to the Enneagram thing, but a lot of the guys who are also fives, I find like you and me don't think the same. We're pretty different people. Even like we talked about the job you do, I would hate. I couldn't do that job. I
Yeah.
would not, I wouldn't even be good at it. Like, so we have different personalities and interests, but we have some commonality. Wes is the same way. I think he's opposite of you and he's opposite of me in a lot of ways. Like,
Hmm.
I'm very off the cuff. I'm very like not structured in certain ways, but overly structured in others. And then like you look at his videos and my videos, and they're seemingly polar opposites. But like he's a guy that I really get along well with and love talking to. And I
Yeah.
find like regardless of our differences, there's like this weird connection that happens. And I don't know, it's just interesting, especially because in my personal life, the only other fives that I know well are my dad, which is weird that it's weird and not weird. Like it's one of those things where it's like, oh, of course I am. But then the other one is my wife's dad, who I hate. Um,
Hmm.
and it's interesting that like for her, maybe she looked for someone who had something
Well,
like him.
what parts about his personality is it that like irk you then?
All of it.
Huh.
There was a time where we had too close of proximity early in our marriage, and that was very unhealthy.
Okay.
I'll say that without getting too personal. Um, on like a human level, I don't hate him. Like I
No,
don't
sure.
wish ill upon him, and hate is a strong word, but like the less I see him, the happier I am. So, but it's interesting because like other than my dad and my wife's dad, I don't know anybody else who's a five. And when you look at the statistics of like how many fives there are, it's actually one of the smaller like number classes. There's not as many of them statistically. And then even beyond that, like looking at like TV shows and stuff, a lot of these like ranking systems will tell you like what characters are like you. And for
Yeah.
fives, there's like none. It's like maybe Ron Swanson, but they're also not definitive about it. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's just weird that in the knife community, I've found that when I've asked even small groups, there's been like, oh yeah, I'm a five, I'm a five, I'm a five, I'm a five. And it's like, well, how did we all get here? Like
Yeah.
there's gotta be some kind of magnetism there. I don't know.
It's a weird one. I mean, I'd be interested to know too, because I think the Myers-Briggs test is a slightly different typology.
Yep.
And people that are investigators or fives on the Enneagram could still test fairly differently, I think, within Myers-Briggs.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
I'm
it,
an INTP on Meyer-Briggs, and I feel like you said you were pretty
and the
different.
INTJ.
Oh, okay,
So,
we're close.
but just knowing that, like when you had told me that, it was very obvious why we are different in the ways that we are, I think, because you are perceiving versus my judging and needing structure and like planning and things like that.
Mhm.
So I feel like taking a few different typologies like that together, you can get a pretty good sense of how you're going to mesh with someone. And I like the fact that I think I told you when we were hiking too that Myers Briggs, some part of the core of it is how you communicate with other people, and whether that's through more abstract ideas or through more concrete experiences.
Mhm.
And generally, I think I'm the same as you. And most of the people I find myself getting along with and bouncing ideas off of tend to be very abstract thinkers, and we're going deep into things, and not necessarily just talking about experiences or circumstances, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I find like I enjoy storytelling and talking about experiences to a certain degree. And I enjoy hearing other people's stories, but the times when I most enjoy them are when they're like illustrative of some kind of larger lesson that's like metaphysical. Like I want to get to the limits of brain power, and that's like what abstraction is, right?
Yeah.
Like when I'm alone in the car thinking about things, my mind goes to crazy places. And so that totally makes sense the way you describe it, where it's like that abstraction and getting away from like, I don't know, just like this happened, there's cause and there was effect, end of story. Those kinds of things don't interest me. They
Every
can be
summary,
important to learn, they can be insightful, but it's not interesting, you know?
every summary you'll hear of like INTJs, INTPs, or like investigator types is one of the first things is always like hate small talk. And well, yeah, really, if you're not teaching me something new or like explaining a concept I haven't thought about before, then it's like this doesn't feel like you're providing value, really. Uh, it's funny, yeah, running into people like that, and you just immediately like, okay, this is not going to work.
Yep. It's
Yeah.
funny because my wife, I love her. Obviously, I'm married to her. She is like, she's the antithesis of the way that I am in that regard, where like for her, it's all about the like small talk, and she
Huh.
doesn't want to worry about anything that's like outside of reality and fact. And, like, so it's interesting because like I've had to learn painfully over time how to like still engage in the type of communication that can sometimes be difficult for me. But I
That's
mean,
funny. Yeah. I mean, my girlfriend's kind of the same way, but I think it has a certain grounding effect that is healthy and balancing thing. I don't think let loose to like how we would be if you read the typologies of people that are the same investigators or like INTJs. It's like, I don't know, philosophers and physicists that lived these like super isolated, sad lives, or people that literally had like mental breakdowns or like were psychotic or serial killers. It's like clearly something in there is not great left unchecked. So it's good to
imagine if
have,
you have someone egging you on instead of
yeah,
grounding you, then you don't want to accelerate on that course.
yeah. So it's good to have somebody who like you can just be with in the moment and teaches you the other things that you should know to be a well-rounded human. Right? So it's nice.
Very interesting. Man, well, we're at like 3 hours. This has a way of happening on my podcast, which is kind of by design. I like to leave it open for a long time. Um, is there anything, Nick, that you think we should talk about? Any topics we haven't gotten deep enough into or we haven't even touched that you think would be insightful for people in the EDC community? Or should we kind of put a bow on it and leave it until the next time? Because this won't be the last time we podcast together for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I know we didn't talk that much about the specifics of design per se.
Which is weird
Relative.
because I meant to go like deepest down.
Yeah. Well, what I'll tell people, I mean, I get some people every now and then asking me about design stuff, and I think more and more people are going that way and kind of experimenting with different software. There's a lot of different choices that you can use. Fusion 360 is just one of them. But generally, what I tell people is that it's not as hard as you think to get into design. The actual learning of like a software or even sketching stuff out and making it work, it's a pretty easy process when it comes down to it. As long as you know the very basics of like how a knife is put together.
Mhm.
If you have an interest in designing knives like that, then you should definitely pursue it. It's never been really a better time with all the OEMs that we have available. Like if you are able to come up with something original, then there's a good chance that if you work hard enough, you can actually turn that thing into a reality. It's kind of harder now since more people are doing it. It's almost a bad thing for me to tell people to do this, but there's a little more crowded space in terms of OEMs and like trying to vie for people's production time and stuff like that. But there's still a good amount of space to grow. And I think it's cool that most people don't even think that it's something they could do. And, I didn't even think that it was something that somebody my age would be able to do, or that it would be this easy to learn how to use CAD or do anything like that. So I always just tell people, if it's something that interests you, you should go for it. You can always send me a message or something, and I'll happily give CAD advice or pointers for anything related to knives, really. So it's like everything else. It only benefits everybody. I think if more people are getting deeper into it.
Yeah. And on your site, you blogged quite a bit about your process as you went through it the first time. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, this whole thing is really born out of a desire to go deeper into knives. I feel like a lot of times when you're a collector, it feels like there's this veil where you don't fully understand what goes on behind the scenes with knife making, and not even just how knives are made, but like how knives come to be in production, or how pricing works, and how like prototyping and just the whole process generally works, like how an idea turns out to be an actual physical knife. And part of my goal was just to answer those questions for myself. And there's some people that I think intentionally try to obscure those things because it's in their benefit to make it seem like was such a hard thing that I did, and like only I could do this thing, or like these design choices are the best for some odd reason. It's really not.
It's the same people who are saying that their heat treat is different from what anybody else can do on a steel. It's a recipe.
Yeah, I feel like there's been a lot of that where it's kind of anecdotal stuff, or just like a lineage of people that seem to have these secret recipes and stuff. The guy, I forget his username, but Super Steel Steve, right, on YouTube. He was on the Sharp Talk podcast every now and then.
Yeah.
Kind of an inflammatory fellow, but
yes, he is.
Also, I really enjoyed watching his content, and I like the way that he just breaks things down on a very simplistic, understandable level, and I like the way that he calls people out for kind of beating around the bush when it comes to a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily that complex, or it doesn't need to be the way
people try to make things complicated so they're less easy to understand when it's to their advantage.
Yeah.
He did one time about edge geometry of the actual edge, not like bevel geometry, talking about a chisel ground edge. And I had never heard anybody even talk about it. And I haven't watched even close to all of his videos, but I've seen some of them. And that one was really good, where it was like learning about what an inclusive angle is on an edge is not rocket science. If I can understand it in a real quick video, then anybody can understand it in a real quick video. I'm not incredible at learning. And yeah, it's just like he played it very simply. And it was like, that's the advantage of that type of edge. I get it now. And anybody who's like trying to swirl fancy words around it and talk about it like it's this weird proprietary different thing, it's like, no, it's not. It's not. And he just walked through exactly why, and it makes sense, and now it clicks in my brain. So I like that.
Yeah, I feel like you'll see that more, I think, if you end up taking this design and then you get it produced, you see what actually happens with the back and forth between an OEM. They're sending you draft revisions of a 2D or 3D model of what you're sending them, and then you actually get it in hand and you see how that operates. For me, not as a reviewer, it definitely changed the way that I look at knives with a different kind of eye. And it also changes the way you perceive other people who are doing the same thing, who are either designing knives or making knives, and the way that they market them or talk about them. And for better or for worse, it kind of gives you an eye to sift through like who's BSing and who's actually trying to create the best thing that they can make. And so without disparaging anybody, all I'll say, right, is that people should do it. It's not that hard. And if it interests you, then I can only help you do it more, right? I can give you tips as much as I can, but go get Fusion for free, like I said, and just start doing it, basically. You'll find out that it's a super fun way to go deeper into the hobby, if that's what you like to do, if you're into design. And yeah, I don't know. You can hit me up if you have any questions.
For sure. And Nick, if you were to identify one or a couple, like you said, I don't want to throw any people under the bus, but if you were to identify some of the best examples in the community of people who are a good example of being a knife designer, who's maybe just being very open about it, or who's being very open about what their product is, or like who are the designers or makers right now that you kind of respect and that you like watching and that you kind of draw inspiration from or want to pay attention to that you think people should be looking out for?
Well, a lot of the people that are getting into design now are being pretty transparent, which is really cool, because you're kind of learning along with them through the process. They're taking you through the design process, through prototypes. So like Orion Knives and Blade Banter with his Solaris that he just people are starting to receive in homes is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few people like that. So like Vero also doing his production stuff, Arcane Design. All these people are slowly building their brands and being as transparent, I think, as they can with people, which is nice. When it came to learning about design, Ferrum Forge was a really good resource for me, not even just as a personal emailing, asking questions, hanging out type of thing, but he has a long backlog of videos where he goes into knife making and design and some of the
Those
decisions.
videos that they were putting up were impressively open, especially for their time, I think.
Yeah, because, like most people, you come into it and you don't really know anybody. So they were just talking about what they knew and why they made the decisions that they made. So you can usually tell who's being really transparent about their process and not. And they'll usually post a lot of content about like the actual knife making process, which is really cool. And I'm partial to the people I like collecting, like Ferrum Forge and like Skiff made blades. So I don't know that my recommendations are gonna weigh that much, but
yeah, for sure. No, I think those are good recommendations, especially like for folders. Those people are all being pretty open. They're doing a lot of engaging. Everyone you mentioned has been nice to me as well. So I like that. I think also like if you're trying to get like deeper info on like steels and like fixed blades, Alex Steingraber is one who like follow that dude for a week and you'll learn a lot. And the way he talks about it is just super natural and like welcoming and cool. And like the way he goes through Rockwell or like heat treating his blades and then Rockwell testing them. And like, there's nothing hidden about his process. He shows you every step on Instagram Live, unfiltered and unedited. And it's awesome. And like, I think the direction of people moving more that way is a good thing. So I know you keep bugging me about it too. I am going to talk to my buddy Ryan, who I've been designing the knife with, and hopefully very soon I'll start sharing some details, even though it's early. And our hesitance mostly comes from like, we haven't done this before and we don't even know which OE we're going with yet for manufacturing. And like, there's some stuff that still needs to be figured out. So we don't want to string people along for too long, but I think you're right. I think people probably would enjoy, at least some subsection of people would enjoy seeing the journey. And I think that's also part of why I talked you into coming on this.
I mean, it's not just that people would enjoy per se. I mean, my Kickstarter failed. It didn't. Not enough people basically had either heard about the knife or saw enough content about it to sway them to purchase it. Granted, it's kind of a polarizing thing, but I think it is really important with new makers, new designers, anybody who's kind of coming into this hobby. I mean, we even talked about people, pirate accounts coming into this hobby. People are just they're cautious and they're slow to adjust to things sometimes, and you want to build trust like that. And I think had I like brought people along through that 2-year process and just like, here's what I learned today about, what I had to change on the design, this prototype, this is why I had to make this modification. It's a long time to build a following of people that appreciate that you're being transparent about it, that trust you because of all the information that you're being really open about. So I think it can only help you. Like hiding information just gets really skeezy sometimes. It's hard to avoid doing people dirty that way.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I'm glad that you came on. I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation. And I think, I don't know, not to like sit here and shill for you, but you're a designer who like, I was able to hold your prototype. And I was one of those people who, when I first saw it, didn't get it. And then I was able to like handle it, use it, carry it, and it clicked for me and I got it and I liked it. And then like after that experience, getting to know you more and more and seeing who you are, like the more that I've been let in on Nitch Designs, it's been illustrative. Is that how you say it? Illustrative. That
So.
like that I'm more bought into what you're doing in the future. And so I think the fact that like I don't know, the more you get to know somebody, the more you get let in. It's only natural that you trust them more and more, or you distrust them more and more. I guess if you're not trustworthy, don't let people in more. But like if you are and you let people see what you're up to and what you're doing, then I think it's a really good thing. So I'm glad that we were able to do this, and hopefully more people have you on their radar, because I think you're a designer to watch. I think even though that Kickstarter didn't happen, you have proven that you're good at designing functional, cool, different knives. And there's now some people who know about you and are excited to see what comes next. And you learned a ton, like a 2-year process of designing and prototyping and like creating a knife that was ready. That's not something that people who haven't started yet have in their favor. And so I'm excited for the projects that you've got in the works to come out and to see what's coming up. And
Yeah, appreciate it. It's been a journey for sure, and I'm still evolving design wise. So one thing that I kind of do behind the scenes, I haven't really been able to show this off at all because I just don't have that many designs that are getting into production quite yet. There's a lot of things in the works that I can't necessarily talk about, but I kind of design knives in threes basically, which is fun for a few different reasons. It's kind of, I guess, in the same way that you might have like an EP on a record and you have certain songs that are playing into each other and you have these themes that you're working with and you're kind of building around certain constraints. And that could be really fun. And having design features that you're bringing across different models. But at the same time, I also see a lot of people that hitch their wagons to a design aesthetic or a feature that's like, I don't know that that's functional or that that's really working. And I kind of wish you hadn't stuck with that and now you're forced to keep doing that. So I also am kind of forcing myself, okay, so for these three, it's going to be kind of this thing. And then for these other three, I'm doing an entirely different type of construction or a different idea. And I'm trying to make that work now. So hopefully within this year, I'm doing as best I can to have certain designs that I have going with other companies to be released, if not this year, the next year. And hopefully continually evolving in that way so that, a little bit of something for everybody, I think. I'm trying not to do the same thing as everybody else it's kind of in the name of Nitch Designs that I'm trying to carve out my own little weird niche of things that I don't think people are doing. And it's an aesthetic that I appreciate. And I think it still has to be a functional, useful tool. But if not one of my designs, then I'm sure another one will be coming out that you'll probably end up liking.
Killer. Yeah, I think even just from the few things that you've let me see kind of confidentially, I can say that there's a lot of variety in the types of knives that you design, which is especially unique, I think, for somebody who's pretty like new onto the scene at it, to like right off the bat be like polar ends of the spectrum. I think is a cool thing, and it's courageous, and I like courageous design. So I think that's cool, man.
Nice.
Can you tell people real quick where they can find you, in case if it's on YouTube, these links will be down below, but if you're listening, pay attention. Nick, where can people find you online if they want to follow along?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. I mean, it's just Instagram, Nitch Designs. So that's NITCH_DSGNS on Instagram. And then the website is just nichdesigns.online.
Very cool.
So there you can see all the stuff that happened with the Ingress design. I have like a whole write-up of the prototyping process, changes made between them. There's a link to like the Kickstarter page where you can kind of see all that information since they keep everything up. And then kind of a side thing that I like doing right now, it's just a single blog post that I have. It's called Welcome to the Knife Community on my website. And it's kind of like a living reference for people that either want to basically consume more knife content, or they're new to the hobby and they don't exactly understand how this weird microcosm works. It's kind of a place where I'm detailing like, where do people go to have knife content or to interact with other knife people? So like, what are the YouTube channels that would be a good starting point, or Instagram hashtags or accounts, or what are all the podcasts about knives that are currently broadcasting and creating content? So if you have a desire to, learn about more podcasts or figure out more channels or groups or anything, that's a good place to start, I think. I'm going to work on creating more content that's geared towards bringing new people into the hobby and kind of getting them up to speed. And so hopefully, if you have any feedback on that, you can also just email me or send that to me. I can add more stuff to the site.
Very cool. Well, sweet. Nick, thank you so much, dude. I really appreciate this. I'm sure it won't be long before we either see each other again or do this again. I need to loan you the Arius genuinely soon. We've been talking about that for months, and I don't know how we haven't made it happen. So
it's mostly so I can loan you the skiff too, because I feel like it would be an interesting head-to-head.
It would. Yeah. I'm not opposed at all to trying that out. So yeah, we'll see each other again soon, but genuinely, thank you for coming on. And yeah, as soon as you have something concrete that you can share that is coming to market and like that you're allowed to talk about, then let's definitely do this again. Because again, not only are you a buddy who, sure, I have bias because you're a friend now, but I genuinely do appreciate your designs and like them and the way that you think. And so I want to, in any way that I can, help people see that, because if they're following me because they like my taste, then you're within the realm of my taste. I think it's fair to share you a little bit. So yeah, we'll do this again soon, but thank you, buddy.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's been really fun.
Of course. Absolutely, man. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. This has been episode number 11 already. And yeah, pretty soon I don't know, these are just going to keep on rolling. So thank you, everybody, for listening. If you made it all the way to 3 hours and 16 minutes, you are an animal. I appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everyone.